Hello, welcome. First week back on Andrew Talks to Awesome People, and I think we just froze. That's the good way to come back. We've been off for about 3 months, and this week Andrew is talking to himself, but with Mark. Mark's here. Is Mark coming in? There he is.
Hello.
Hey, Mark.
Hey,
Good to see you.
this one is going to be awesome,
Well,
especially
because
awesome.
because we're talking about awesome things.
Yeah,
That's what it is, and you're an
yeah,
awesome person. So, so just for people who weren't around last week to know kind of what we're doing, basically, Andrew Talks to Awesome People is not going to be an interview with somebody every single week because the prep for that it was taking over my life. So, what we decided to do after the break is I'll be doing hopefully 2 interviews a month. And then the other weeks will either be mix tank takeovers like we did last week for Mix Review for PureMix members, but anyone can watch the YouTube stream, or things like tonight, which is basically I'm going to blab about some stuff and then you guys ask questions, either about the thing I'm blabbing about, which this week is Atmos
Mhm.
music, or just other questions, and I will answer them. And then also putting together some panels for people to talk about stuff, and then also just some Q&A sessions with people. So no interview, but we'll bring back some people we've already talked to do extra Q&A because everybody's always like, there should be part 9. I'm like, well, I don't really have anything else left to ask them myself, but you
Mhm.
guys might. So
It's
anyway, that's the
equally white
big
part nine.
plan. Yeah. So the big plan is that, and the first week of it is now, and we're talking about Atmos today.
Yeah, this is
So
going to be amazing. I have a ton of questions myself, so I'm excited to see you go through it because you have certainly gone down the rabbit hole and you're quite equipped over
I
there. So,
I am living in the rabbit hole, and it's
yeah,
it's a pretty good rabbit hole, and it's really
yeah.
interesting, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes to stuff that really interests me, which is how do people hear? Because
Hmm.
all the binaural stuff is about how people process location of sound and how can you trick people into hearing stuff. And I mean, a lot of mixers have been into that forever. You're always
Right.
trying to make stuff sound like it's coming from outside the speakers and behind you. And like Chad Plake was really into it. Bruce Woodian loved the Q sound stuff. We used to run just little percussion things through and spend hours like making sure it was as good as we could get it and getting stuff
Mhm.
outside the speakers. So now to have a system that is meant to do nothing but get stuff to move while you're wearing headphones is pretty cool.
Yeah,
But that's just
yeah.
one aspect of the whole Atmos thing. So I'm going to start talking, but Mark, you're going to interrupt me if I'm not making sense or I'm assuming people know things who don't, may not. And
Awesome.
so any
Yeah,
explanation stuff, just stop me.
yeah, yeah.
So Dolby Atmos is a technology that's been around for years now, and it's been used primarily for theatrical release, and then it was adopted by Netflix and then more and more streaming sites. And now it's pretty standard for visual things to have their audio in Atmos. Really, every single thing you stream is going to be either in 5.1 or Atmos. So, which is actually a good thing to talk about. So, 5.1 is a very specific speaker format. It is literally 5 speakers and 1 subwoofer, and it is left, center, right, and then left and right behind you, and then a subwoofer, and that's it. And your mixed your mix has 6 tracks to it, one for each of those speakers.
Mhm.
Those have rules when they're played back on systems that have fewer speakers to kind of fold the stuff that's in the back into the front but at a lower level and things like that. But it's very much a discrete monitor format that describes the speakers, and you mix directly for those speakers. Atmos is what's called an object based, I probably should have had a word to put in there, format, an object based format. So wherever you are mixing, you have a certain number of speakers and you are discretely mixing through those speakers. But what you're doing is you're placing sound in a 3D space. And then, depending on the playback configuration, Atmos will figure out how much of it should be coming out of what speakers. So it's done during playback, not during
Mhm.
the printing of the mix. And I'll show you pictures of this later on. But
Mhm.
it's cool in that it abstracts um, the speaker setup that you've got that you use for mixing from the playback system. And I know that there are some tools out there that have had this forever. I mean, Nuendo, I think, has had object-based panners for 20 years or something crazy. But it hasn't been a mainstream technology that other people have been able to stream. It's just been a tool you could use while you were working on something, but at some point you had to commit it to an actual monitoring format. With Atmos, you don't. So the way it works is, I guess, let's start showing my screen,
Yeah.
maybe. All right, we'll start showing my screen. So this is a Pro Tools session. This is a low roar track off of the latest album. And I'm currently in the process of doing Atmos mixes of that entire record. And this is the first track on the album, but that's irrelevant. So basically, this should look very familiar to anyone who works in Pro Tools. And the only real addition to work in Atmos is you've got a new column that you can show, and it's always there. You can show it in any version of Pro Tools HD. You got to have the Pro version, otherwise you can't do surround stuff. So the vanilla version of Pro Tools won't do it. And then you have a column that's called objects, and what objects are audio paths into the Atmos renderer. So basically, you've got Pro Tools, and you still have the Pro Tools mixer, but you can take things outside of the Pro Tools mixer, send them off to the Dolby renderer, which I'll show you that screen right now. And then they will show up, and these are indicators for audio input into any of the objects. And then each of those objects can just be panned around. So if I hit play here, what you'll see in here is you'll see audio lighting up a lot of the objects down at the bottom here. And then you'll see there are meters for every speaker output. And what you see here, this is my physical monitoring format. So the renderer is showing me the audio that's coming in. And these channels here are special channels, which I'll talk about in a second. And then this shows how it's going out to the speakers. So at the moment, what the renderer is doing is it's taking whatever I give it with whatever pan information I give it, and then making it come out of a 914 system. So my speaker setup is a left, center, right across the front, then subs in the front. Then I've got a pair of speakers that are touching the left and right, and it's called the wide. So it's basically to spread the front wall. It's not necessarily sides. It's just a way for you to get wider than the left, center, right. That's that pair of speakers there. Then you've got left and right sides, which are about halfway back in the room. And I'm not going to move the monitor around to move the camera, but just trust me, that's where they are. Then you've got your left and right rear speakers, which are the ones you can see hanging. One of them's behind the cat flap, and one of them's next to the modular, the cat tree. So those are my 9 speakers that go around, right? 3 on the front wall, and then 2, 2, and 2. Then I've got 4 hanging from rafters above me, and that is these here. So left top front, left top rear, right top rear. So that's like a quad set of speakers above me, and then the LFEs. So this is 9 around the bottom, 1 for the sub, and 4 for the top. So it's a 914 setup, and that's the way the numbering system works. The first number is always the number of speakers around you at the normal listening plane. Then the next number is how many subwoofer channels you have. Now, I actually have multiple subwoofers because it's part of the Dolby spec for this type of room, and I wanted to be compliant with that. So I've actually got 4 subwoofers, which is crazy for this size room, but it sounds amazing. But they get a mono feed. So it doesn't matter how many subwoofer speakers you have, it's how many channels of low frequency energy, which is LFE, you actually have. Personally, I mean, you could have a 22.2 room, and if it's a gigantic room, having a stereo subwoofer makes sense. But for my room and where most of the stuff I do is going to be listened to, it's not theatrical. So a mono subwoofer is absolutely fine. Then the third number is up top. The quad for me, but you can have, I think, up to 6 really in a standard Dolby Atmos setup. But you can have 70 speakers if you want, and you would just set up the renderer. And I don't know actually if you could have 70. I don't remember what the maximum is. It might be 1116 or something like that. There is a maximum number of speaker outputs. But anyway, so that's the deal. So the special channels, though, you got a question?
So I do. Just a quick one. So for anybody who's watching and thinking, I'm out of here. This is like crazy
Yes,
amounts of money in
don't
speakers.
be out of here.
Right.
Don't be out of here. You
Right.
can do this. And for months, until all the bits and pieces for my Atmos setup showed up, I was doing this exclusively in headphones.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to
Right.
get to the whole binaural side of things. And you could work in 5.1 with this,
Right.
and then just tweak height settings for things that are happening in the binaural, and then you'll hear the way it'll fold down into 5.1 if that's what you've got.
Yeah.
And for playback at home for consumers, there are a million different sound bars that have Atmos decoders and extra little tweeters that throw stuff at the wall.
Mm-hmm.
The Amazon Echo speaker is a single speaker that does Atmos by throwing stuff around the room. And obviously, it's not as cool as having 900 speakers in your room, but it does work. And it's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely more than just direct sound coming out of the speakers. So
Right.
the whole idea that it is an object-based monitoring environment means that you do not have to have a gigantic speaker setup to actually do Atmos mixes. And there's an argument to be made that at the moment for music, the binaural playback is actually going to be heard more often than the speaker playback.
Mm.
So you need to spend a lot of time in headphones as you work in Atmos anyway.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
very good
Cool.
point.
All
Please
right.
stick around. Don't
So
go anywhere.
yeah.
Okay.
So we'll get to that. And I just want to say, guys, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'll be collecting those and we'll get to it later. So if you want to learn
Yeah,
how to
and
put each piece of the
there's no
drum kit in a
structure to
different
this.
speaker, and
Yeah,
yeah,
we can take a break and to do some of the questions. If you see some stuff that's really relevant to what we're talking about, we can interrupt this at any time. I
cool.
don't have like a PowerPoint. This
Right.
is just in my
Yeah.
head.
Yeah.
And so I can go off into the weeds. Okay,
Awesome.
so I want to really quickly talk about the fact that you've got this purple row of inputs here. What this is what's called the bed. And this is a predefined set of objects that is 10 channels wide, which is 712. So it's 7 speakers around the outside. So it's my speaker setup minus these wides. So you go left, center, right, 2 on the sides in the middle, 2 behind you. That's the 7. A single sub, and then a stereo pair up top. And this is that 712 input. And this is what's called the bed. And what this allows you to do is you can assign things. I actually have a mix bus going because I have more speakers than the 712. I'm not really using the bed except for the subwoofer. But you can assign stuff directly to the bed. And then you get a 712 pan pot. And it just shows up in these speakers. That's great, and a lot of people use the bed a lot. I don't use the bed much. I kind of made my own mix bus that is 914, even though Pro Tools doesn't really support a 914 track width, but I want to wait and get into that in a minute. But basically, the first, 14 of these are inputs that are coming from, I'll show you a little bit of this. It's just a nightmare. There's so much going on in this. So I have a 7.0 mix bus master that feeds a router that's feeding what I'm calling an object bed. And then I'm routing every individual track of that bed, my own bed that I made. So left, center, right, front, wide, which are the ones I told you aren't in the regular bed. There are the sides, there are the rears, and here's my quad high speakers. And each one of these is going to an object, so object 11 up to 23. So 11 through 23 for me is something I get to without taking individual instruments to objects. I don't want to spend too much time getting into the really fine details of it, but basically I've made my own bed, which lets me take the bulk of the mix and just pan things, and I know that they will show up in the speakers I'm asking them to show up in. But because Pro Tools doesn't support a 914 track format, I'm having to cheat some things. So I've got a 7.0 mix bus where I can pan stuff around in 7.0. Then I've got just a stereo send to those wide speakers. So what I'll do, for instance, is take the overheads of the drum kit, put them hard left and right, and then I'll have a send on that track to the wide, and that will spread the overheads a little wider than just the left, center, right. So that's how I get to that, is just with a stereo thing there. Then I've got a quad mix bus that is just for the height. So if I want to send something up top, I can just add a little bit of it. So like I would take the overheads and add a little bit to the top front as well. So now I've got all my cymbals taking up space that is covering the entire front wall of the mix, but my kick and snare are going just to the center channel, things like that. So you've got a huge amount of control, but you've got to decide how you want to take advantage of having multiple speakers and how you want to send to those speakers. And there are a lot of different ways to do it, and a lot of people set things up differently. So I didn't want to turn this into a tour of my Atmos template, because it's still something I'm developing and it changes all the time as I'm doing more and more Atmos mixing. So I don't really want to talk about it other than in the context of what you're seeing on the screen. So anything above 21, I've taken individual bits of audio on tracks and sent them to individual objects. And then those objects can pan around. Now, why would I do that instead of necessarily just adding them to my bed that I made? The reason is because if you're panning inside of Pro Tools and the audio is just being sent to different places, the Atmos renderer doesn't know that you meant for something to be in a specific speaker. It just knows that there's audio coming out of that speaker only at that moment. But if you had a different monitoring configuration, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. It might be coming out of two different speakers to try and give you a phantom position at a spot between two of the speakers that you actually have. When you send something to an object, the renderer does the panning for you, so it is much better at placing things exactly where you want. If you pan it inside of Pro Tools, now you still use the Pro Tools panner to automate it. It's actually quite cool. You can just turn this on and off, and what you'll see is that the dots in the panner. So this is the panner for the Evil Celli track. If I turn off the object, you'll see these dots go green, and that means it's now panning to this internal Pro Tools bus. When I make the object active, all of the same pan information is retained, but it's moving the object inside of the renderer. So let me see if I can get both on the screen. If I do, that's about as small as that wants to go. But if I do, let's see, do that. No, I'll do that. And then I'll make Pro Tools that side. There we go. And then if I come over here where the Evil Celli are and I pan them around, what you'll see is there's a dot for every speaker. And if oh, it's all difficult. There you see it now? You see that blue dot moving. What that means is that's actively being panned. So I'm panning the object inside of the renderer, as opposed to if I turn this object off, then that dot will go away completely. And now my audio is being panned inside of my mix bus, but it's just changing how much is coming out of these different dots that represent the objects that I made to be my mix bus. So this is panning information that's set up inside of Pro Tools. When I make the object active, which this track, there it is. Now I'm actually moving this with metadata inside of the Atmos renderer. Now, why is this important? The technicalities of it are, it's important because it changes how discreetly you're going to different speakers, like I talked about a second ago. But the practical side of how this works when you're exporting mixes is when you bounce a mix that is going to be an Atmos mix that is going to be sent off to be Atmos out into the world, you make what's called an ADM file. And Advanced Dolby, I don't actually remember what it stands for. Doesn't matter. Someone will tell us in the chat, I'm sure. But the point of it is a multi-channel wave file. So what it has is it has the audio from every single object. So these files can be gigantic. You've got up to 128 objects that you could have all running live, all moving. And so it will bounce every single one of these objects into a channel of the multi-channel wave file. And then it will have all of the metadata to describe where that object was all the way through the, oh, there you go, audio definition model, broadcast wave format. All right, well, you see why I didn't remember that. It doesn't even have Dolby in the name. Um, so it, and the metadata for every single one of these objects is also stored inside of that wave file. So it's like a multi-track of your mix, but you can't then split it apart and replay it. I mean, you could, because it is just a wave file, but as soon as you start messing with it, the metadata gets screwed up, and then it's no longer a Dolby Atmos file. But you bounce either into the renderer itself, or Pro Tools is actually quite cool in that you can bounce the ADM directly inside of Pro Tools and bounce offline, which you cannot do when you're bouncing to the renderer. If you're bouncing to the renderer, you literally put the renderer in record, hit play in Pro Tools. Pro Tools is actually sending timecode to the renderer, and it will bounce the ADM until you hit stop. But if you've got everything running in Pro Tools, and there are a couple of things that are weird metadata wise, which I'm not even going to go into, but basically 99% of the time, you can just bounce the ADM offline in Pro Tools, and that will generate the exact same ADM file that you would get if you bounced into the renderer. Okay, I think I've covered that part of things.
Yes, I want to do a recap if that's cool, because that's a whole lot.
Yes, please do. I'm going to move my screen so I'm looking at the camera.
This is amazing. You just you made this make sense very quickly. So, okay, so we've got two things happening. In addition to Pro Tools, we have this other piece of software called the Dolby Renderer.
Yes.
This is a somebody asked in the chat if there was a hardware piece of gear that they had to make, and this is software. You can get it
is
from
purely
Dolby.
software, and it can run on the same computer as Pro Tools. I have
Mhm.
mine running on a separate Mac Mini for reasons I will explain in a little bit, but I have successfully run pretty big Atmos mixes with the renderer on the same computer, and I'm using an iMac Pro. So
Right,
it's not some crazy Mac Pro from 2019,
right,
and it does work. But
right,
there are a couple very small limitations with that. But you have to go crazy to get around the limitations, even if it's on a separate computer. So yeah,
right.
just software.
Okay, cool. So we have this piece of software that's running alongside Pro Tools that is doing the rendering. And when that last piece that you just explained made something like click in my head, you're actually recording your mix into the renderer software.
Yes, your
Yeah.
playback engine, when you have the render on the same computer, the playback engine is Dolby Audio Bridge. There are other ways to
Okay.
do it. There's an older way you can do it with sends and returns, but that's a mess. So there's actually a core audio device called
Mhm.
Dolby Audio Bridge that is 129 channels wide, 128
Wow.
channels for all your audio, and then the 129th channel is for the time code.
Mm,
So
right.
that's
Just
all
like
of
the
your
tape base.
outputs go straight to the renderer. Then the renderer has an audio device that is for the monitoring. So it's up to
Hmm.
you to get out of the renderer into some sort of monitor controller so you can turn the volume up and down and listen to your mix. But you could actually go straight to speakers, and there's an attenuation knob. Yeah, you're not seeing my screen at the moment, but it doesn't
Oh
matter.
yeah,
There's a
here.
knob. It's all right. There's a knob at the top of the renderer that can control monitor level if you want it to. So you could really, really cheaply just hook up some speakers using the outputs on the audio interface you're no longer using for your
Hmm.
outputs because you're going into the Dolby Audio Bridge, and come out into your speakers and use this as your monitor pot. And
Right.
if you have the Pro Tools Control app on an iPad,
Hmm.
you can control the monitor level from there. It's a
Right.
full-blown monitor controller within that app. Or if you have a Pro Tools dock, you can map the monitor control knob to control that. So yeah, you
Mhm.
can do a full-blown monitoring setup for this like super easily and cheaply.
Right. Okay, great. Very helpful. And then just want to do one more rundown on the metadata portion of it. So can you explain how
The
that
metadata
all
is
ties
it's
in?
literally it well, okay, it's oh yeah, video feedback. So the metadata is just pan automation. If
Mhm.
you pan an object and it's automated so it moves during the course of the song, then that is stored in the metadata. If you don't move it, then just the position is stored in the metadata.
Okay.
There's one other thing as well, which is when you're doing a binaural mix, there's a set of settings for the binauralization of um, the audio as it goes into the binaural engine that is only for the binaural, and it has four settings: off, near, mid, and far. And that is to spatialize, for lack of a better word, how far away the sound should sound in the binaural rendering. That is ignored in speaker playback, and it's ignored in some other areas too, which we'll get to when we talk about the consumer side and how you actually can listen to this stuff. But that is the one extra set of metadata, and that is not automatable per object, but it can be different in every mix that you do. So you set that distance for the binaural render. That's what the metadata is.
Okay, so and the last thing I wanted to touch on was you're saying that this wave file is not delivering. It's not a 128 channel wave file that then gets
It is
sorted.
if you use all 128 objects.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Normally, I mean, like a normal sized bounce for a 4 minute song will be anywhere from probably half a gig up to like 7 or 8 gig if you're using a million objects.
We're coming for you, video guys.
Yeah.
Finally.
Now, yeah, finally. But then in the out in the world, obviously, like if you're streaming a song on Apple Music or on Amazon Music or on Tidal, they're not trying to stream you 6 gigabytes of shit. So there are interim file formats that will allow them to be streamed. So there, whatever, some stuff is combined along the way and whatever, but that ADM is the discrete master that has all of the audio it needs separate to replay the metadata to recalculate how much should come out of each speaker depending on what you're playing it back on. So that stuff is recalculated on the fly as you listen, depending on
Okay.
how many speakers you've got.
Awesome. Okay. All right. I'm going to let you go back into it. We are having a lot of comments about, is this relevant to people at a more independent level? So we're going to touch on that eventually. So hang out. Cool.
Yeah, we definitely will. As a technology, it's super cool. I mean, like I say, the holy grail for a lot of engineers has been to make stuff sound more spatial than the speakers that are in the room. And I think a lot of people were really into quad when it happened, and a lot of people were really hoping 5.1 would stick. But the problem with all of the multi-channel formats up until now is, like we were talking about before, they discrete monitor formats. You either have four speakers set up in quad or five speakers in a subwoofer set up in 5.1, or you cannot play back that format correctly. That's it. Whereas Atmos has the ability to accommodate any monitoring setup. You can technically play back an Atmos mix on a single mono speaker, and it has rules about how it will fold everything down, and there you go. It'll play back. It's not going to be the most spatial experience in the world playing it back on a mono speaker, but it will play back. Okay, so I think that covers that in terms of the Pro Tools and the renderer and having those two pieces of software set up. And then what you print as. So I'm not sure that there's really anything else about the process. So are there any questions about just the setup from a kind of general standpoint, Mark? Is there anything else?
Let me see in Crowdcast here and just going through the questions real quick.
And I probably said a lot of stuff wrong, and apparently Steve Genowick is around, so he can sort us out.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve. Steve,
okay,
you're going to be on the panel, by the way. I'm putting together a panel for Atmos for either October or November, and obviously Steve is top of my list. Steve, for people who don't know him, worked with Al Schmidt for years and years and years. Capital engineer, fantastic engineer, and has been doing tons of amazing Atmos mixes since, I think, basically since anybody started doing them for music.
Wow. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. We have one. Well, maybe we can hit a little bit of this now. Just for anybody who's wondering if this is something that they're just going to kind of ignore. So Ethan BM asks, as a local touring band, is this attainable for us? And I'd like to just kind of change that into like independent artists, low
Well, it's
budgets, you know.
absolutely attainable because, like we said, you can just get the renderer software and work in headphones. And that is a very valid way to work. There are a lot of people who do Atmos mixes like professionally, that's what they do, who will actually start their mixes on headphones
Hmm.
and then go to speakers later on. And that could be just a logistical thing because they don't happen to have 16 speakers in their house or whatever. Or it can just be because that's the way they like to build the mix up. And it can also just be because the binaural is a very important version of the Atmos mix.
Hmm.
So yes, it's certainly attainable. You can do it in Pro Tools. You can definitely do it in Nuendo. I'm sure because Cubase is made by the same folks that there is some Atmos functionality in Cubase. I don't know for sure. I would imagine someone is going to say in the chat that Studio One blows everything else off the face of the planet and does it better and has Atmos and has had it for 90 years, or who knows. Like
It's
they
come
will
up.
all do it. Logic, obviously, because Apple has really committed to Atmos music, it has some integration right now, and I can only imagine that they are ramping that up like crazy. So you don't
Hmm.
have to work in Pro Tools. I work in Pro Tools, and I love the implementation. I mean, obviously, everything can always be better. And the good thing is, this is Atmos has been around for a long time for theatrical, but it has not been being used for music for that long.
Hmm.
And so hopefully we're still at the point where there is going to be rapid development and improvement in the tools in terms of the UI and the way they work, but also just sonically, like the way the binaural renderer works. There's
Hmm.
no reason that can't keep getting better and better and better. So yeah, okay. So then the other side of that is, well, okay, what do you do with your Atmos mix once you have it if you're an indie band? And the answer is that, especially with Apple stepping in and saying, now we do it as well, you've got two major platforms, and Tidal, numbers wise, is not, one of the big three, but it is a major platform that's been around for a while. They
Hmm.
fully support streaming Atmos, and there are more and more ways you can submit your Atmos mixes to online services. And it's got to only be a matter of time before all of the independent distributors, which I can't even think of their names right now, but the ones where any artist can just say, hey, man, for $25, put this out on every service, they will start to accept Atmos
Hmm.
because the services want content. Now, there has to be some sort of quality control on this, and that's been a big part of getting the Atmos mixing going. Um, and I would say that we've actually been incredibly lucky that there have been some people like Steve Genowick who were staff at places that were needing to generate content. Because at first, it was being done in house.
Hmm.
And because it had to be, they're just the economics of it, and nobody else was set up to do it. So it had to be. And that could have gone horribly wrong. And fortunately, there were some really talented people doing it. And then there were some talented independent people who've been doing it really early. If you guys want to go in the Wayback Machine episode, it's got to be below 20 with Greg Penny. It may even be single digits. He's been doing Atmos and other surround formats from the very beginning. And one of his tracks, along with a bunch of Steve's, his Greg's version of Rocket Man is like one of the
Yeah.
gold standard mixes for
Hmm.
how to do a really cool Atmos mix. Now, this is another thing. We're not even really going to get into it, but the creative side of what you want to do with Atmos. You could just spread the band out a little bit and put some ambience in the back. You can make everything circle your head all the way through the song. You can do whatever you want.
You could put me in the height channel.
I can put you in the high channel as a bat. Yeah. So there are no rules about what you have to do, but there are some guidelines. Now, actually, there are rules, there are technical things. So, okay, going back to being an indie band who wants to do this, you can get the tools to do it yourself easily. But there are also things you have to conform to. Like you'll
Hmm.
notice there on my screen, if you want to pop that up
Yeah.
again for a second, in the renderer, there are a bunch of loudness indicators. And you can also use the Nugent plugin on the 5.1 version of your mix. I'll talk about re-renders in a second because they're actually quite useful. Um, you have to be at -18 or below for a mix to be accepted. Now, technically, it'll play back if you're louder than that, but it has the capability to distort quite easily because if you think about it, like right now, I have 14 speakers in my room. All 14 channels could be going with a bunch of audio, but then if you listen to it on stereo speakers, let alone mono speakers, all of that stuff has to be crashed down to two speakers. And that's just going to get louder and louder and louder. So -18 is allowing for all of that audio to show up in one channel and not just be a square wave. So that's the deal. So there are guidelines. Dolby has published them. They're very easy to find. So, you don't need to take notes with all guidelines for technically how you have to deliver your files. So if you're an indie band and you want to start getting into this, just do some reading. And actually, what we can do is don't share my screen for a second because
Mhm.
I've got a browser tab open somewhere and I've got links open to the two Dolby documents.
Awesome.
Well, actually, I'm
Well,
not going to show you this. I don't know if these are public links or whatever, but Dolby has a
okay.
published spec of like what the file should be for level and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So yes,
So
it's not
have
only
you had
attainable, but it's cool for indie artists.
right? Okay, so I've had people clients ask me because they've heard about stuff online. Is Atmos something I should worry about, or will I need to have it in Atmos in the future, or what should I do with this? You know,
Yeah, I mean, I love that it's something I should worry about. Like, yeah, you should
right?
worry. Stay
Yeah.
up at night worrying about Atmos. No,
I think
it's a
thinking
real
like if this becomes the format or
yes.
something,
It
would
is. It
stereo
is a
go away? Is the
big.
question. Yeah.
It's a very big issue. It's a huge issue for a million reasons, which we could just touch on now. Well, what the hell? We'll have this bit of the discussion right now. So the thing is that the way records have been made for a really long time is you end up with a mix of your song, right? And for a while it was mono, and then it was stereo, and then there were a few other formats, but you would always make a stereo. Stereo is the standard for mixing a song. You want to end up with a stereo mix. But now you also need an Atmos mix. Now you could make the stereo mix from the Atmos, and there are arguments to be made that maybe we should be thinking about mixing an Atmos so that the crash down to stereo is the stereo mix. But that's just a very different thing. Like there's stuff about Atmos where you don't really have a mix bus, but then when you're mixing in stereo, maybe you like to have a mix bus. So you wouldn't necessarily want to make those mixes the same thing, which means that all of a sudden you need to do two mixes of every song. And economics come into play there because there was a mix budget and they just spent it to get their stereo mixes and now they need Atmos mixes. And that is something that's still being worked out. It's not even the same across the board at all labels as to which department pays for it. Some labels, maybe they've all changed now, but some labels were paying for it out of marketing budgets as opposed to A&R budgets. It wasn't even really seen as part of making the record. The record was a stereo thing, and now for our marketing budget, we're going to spend money getting Atmos mixes because that gets us onto better playlists on Apple or whatever it is. So it's complicated and weird, and that is still shaking itself out. But the good news is that there are a lot of mixers now who are set up for Atmos and are cranking out Atmos mixes. And the more we do it, the more we find workflows that allow us to, even if we're not going to work on the stereo at the same time as the Atmos, but to transition quickly from one to the other. So if I'm mixing in stereo and I've got to go to Atmos, I just have a second set of stuff in my template and I reassign a bunch of buses and I start off with my stereo mix, but it's going through the renderer. And then I can immediately just start spreading shit out. And that works
Yeah.
really, really well. And everybody has their own version of that, depending on how
Right.
they mix. The problem can come up when you are doing catalog work and you have to match mixes. So you got to match a stereo mix, but then you've got to do the Atmos mix, and there's not a whole lot of money to do it. You're technically doing two mixes, but for less than a normal mix fee. So that stuff is all
Right.
in play. But getting paid to mix a song in stereo is really difficult sometimes. So
Yes.
let's not
Right.
pretend that that's worked out and it's only the Atmos
Right.
thing that's weird. There is no standard rate for mixing a song.
Right.
I don't even,
Right.
only the very, very top mixers have a standard rate for themselves to mix a song. And I'm not one of them. My mix rate
Yeah,
is
we just
different
need to
on
talk to
every
one of
single
those
project.
guys.
Yeah. Maybe you should. Maybe you should.
I think I
So,
am.
yeah, well, I don't know
um,
about that.
we do have a question that is right in line, not with the rate stuff, but with starting with the stereo mix. So I'll just read his thing. It's from Steve Foster. And he says, "Hi, Andrew. What is your Atmos workflow? Do you start with a solid stereo mix and then spread elements to the sides, back, top, or start from scratch? Thanks."
Yeah, I will, if I've done the stereo mix, like I just said, I've got I'll show you really quickly
Mhm.
without going into any details. So right here is my stereo router. So this is what printed the mix that I was working on. Then I've got down here a 7.0 router, which is part of that mix bus I was talking about before, where I've made myself a 914 mix bus kind of thing, but I make it with a 7.0 bus, a stereo bus to add those second two channels that are wide, then an LFE router, and then a quad up top. And that gives me my mix bus. And like you can see, my wide and my 7.0 router are sharing the same processing. So all I need to do is just start panning. So I start from my stereo mix, and then I just start panning stuff. And then I'll start picking things out of the mix bus and putting them into objects because I want to do fun stuff with them. And I want to make sure that that fun stuff is preserved no matter what happens in terms of the monitoring setup. So I don't really want them in my bed. Technically, I could just mix everything through this 7+2 1 4 setup down here and just use the Pro Tools panning and the sends and things like that to make stuff move around. But the objects, like I was saying before, are more discrete in terms of how they will get to the speakers on the other end. So whenever you're trying to do anything that you want very specifically placed, or you want the movement to be very specific, objects are 99% of the time they're the way to go. But you'll see on this mix, I mean, this isn't done, but I've just chosen to take like the strings and the trumpet stuff and some of my weird programming that I did. That stuff is in objects because I'm moving it around. And I think, um, like if we look at this guy, I could be wrong, but I think like this is changing position. Let's find out each time we go to a new. Yeah. So these guys are moving. This is basically a phrase that happens 3 times with 3 trumpet parts that are doing kind of a reverse pyramid. And each time they play from different places. So it's like a little fanfare that moves around the room. That is much better to do in objects because I know exactly where they're going to be. But I could do it inside of my 7.0 mix bus and even make a 712 mix bus so I would have some height information, but I wanted to be very discreet about where my stuff was going to go, so that's what I did. And I've got all 3 of these guys just change position so you can see. I'll put them here. And this is just really simple pan automation, and you can do it manually by drawing it in. You can grab knobs in latch mode or touch mode. You can use controllers. You can do whatever you want. And this is just the regular Pro Tools Surround Panner, but you can see because that dot is red that it's sending metadata. And actually, here, let's watch these guys move around in the renderer, why don't we? So if I hit play, what you're going to see, there are going to be some dots for those trumpets. And unless I've screwed something up, they should move when we get to the next phrase. They're not going. I've messed something up with my IO setup because this is a mix I haven't worked on in about a month, and I've changed everything about my Atmos setup. But anyway, normally those green balls would be bouncing around the room. So the fact that they're not is me screwing up. It's not that it's difficult or doesn't was, but I've definitely over-explained everything that we needed to say about that.
Oh,
Oh,
it
that
froze
was
there.
how do I
So,
transition into the Atmos mix? Yeah, I start from my
mhm.
stereo mix and then, but now I've already gotten to the point where while I'm doing a stereo mix, I get frustrated because like, oh man, I can't wait to do that thing, and like
Yeah,
it's got to wait. I can't do
yeah,
it yet because it's not Atmos yet.
right. Okay, yeah. So you're thinking about the Atmos mix in the stereo mix. You're kind
Yeah,
of plotting and knowing, I'm going to end up doing
yeah. Now
something like
let
this.
me real quickly actually show my screen again for a second
Hmm.
because I want to talk about something that in the render is called re-renders. So what this means is for because those are the speakers in my room. So that's what it will create. Oh, hold on, let me move this out from under my ugly head. So that will create a 914 output that's feeding my monitor controller, and that's how I hear it through the speakers. But at the same time, it is crashing that down because I've set it up to do this to a 7-1, a 5-1, and a stereo, and then I also have my binaural. So the binaural is going out of different outputs. So this is just what outputs is it coming out of. And I've left 1 through 16 for my speakers, so it skips a couple of channels. Then my 7-1 is coming out of outputs 17 through 24. Then the 5-1 is coming up 25 through 30. Then the stereo is on 31, 32, and the binaural is 33, 34. So 33 and 34 are routed to my headphone amp. And all of these are routed to different inputs on my monitor controller, so I can flip between the 914, 7-1, 5-1 stereo of my mix as it will get crashed down by the Atmos playback when it's played back on a different discrete set of speakers. As well, I can hear my binaural, which what it is technically is the stereo mix, sort of, kinda, but with things rendered based on the binaural settings. So, first of all, it's the distance settings that I showed you before. So, it might have a little bit more ambience on it and be spread between more speakers, and the phase relationships will be different because I've set it to be far instead of near or mid. Or if you switch it off, it's exactly what would happen in the stereo mix. So if you set the binaural settings of every single object in here are identical. There's nothing to say, how do you want me to make this binaural for people wearing headphones? It just comes out stereo. So it's what's
Sorry,
called a
so it
re-render.
froze a little bit there. So in this, can you explain how you're addressing the binaural piece one more time?
Yeah, sorry. So the binaural piece is addressed by the settings that you have for the objects, where you can say what the distance is. So it's either off, which means there's no
Mm.
binaural processing whatsoever, and it's exactly the same as the stereo version of your mix. Or you've got near, mid, and far, which are how much binauralization do you want? How much spatialization, 3Dization, whatever the fuck you want to call it.
Hmm.
It is what is trying to put in the phase relationships that will make your human brain think it's coming from over there, even though you're wearing headphones. That's what binaural sound is. Now, there's some people who argue that binaural is actually just a microphone technique. And I guess, okay, that's true, maybe. But what it is it says binaural recording is put microphones where your eardrums would be and record stuff. And when you play it back, in headphones, it will sound very spatial. You hear the difference between something in front of you and something behind you. Whereas if you have a normal microphone and you just capture something mono, the only way to make it different between being in front of you and behind you is to do some phase tricks, because the difference when you're listening in an acoustic environment between something directly in front of you and directly behind you, you've gotten rid of the time difference between when it hits your ears, right? Because it's still the same distance from
Hmm.
your ears when it's directly behind or even overhead or in front. But the frequency response changes completely because of the
Right.
shape of your outer ear. We talked about this in the hearing health
Hmm.
panel, so I'm not going to go into it. But the pinna here is all rigged to reflect shit and focus at 3.5K ish and get it down your ear hole so you can hear it when a pterodactyl is going to come and kill you.
Right.
Pterodactyls, not so much. But I said that because pterodactyls are above you. And it's why it's actually very hard to get stuff to sound above you, because we're not used to listening for things above us. Like that's just not as important as things that are off
Right.
to the side or behind. So the brain is better at picking up audio cues. So
Hmm.
okay, but here let's touch on something else with this. So the way that a human in an acoustic space figures out where stuff is, and this has happened. Okay, anybody who's had like an old school alarm clock go off, like one that's just beeping, not something that's playing a song or
Hmm.
whatever, but something that's just beeping, like a pure tone. It's almost impossible to find in the room, right? And if it's like a smoke alarm that's stuffed in a drawer somewhere and you can't find it, you
Right.
have to move your head while it's making the noise, and then by picking up on all the different reflections and the different amount of early reflections and reverb that are added to the sound from different directions, your brain goes, oh, it's there. But if you stay perfectly still, it's very, very hard to figure out where it is. So, binaural on its own is trying to add the processing that would happen if stuff were making noise outside of your head and you were hearing it through your ears from somewhere, as
Hmm.
opposed to it's being blasted right into your ears from two little speakers that are strapped to it. Then you've got the Apple spatial audio, which we can go into this in a minute or later or whatever, but what they do is they add a head tracking component to it so that as you move your head, it moves your head inside of the binaural space, which helps your brain say, oh wow, that's actually coming from over there, because it does change. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people have a lot of trouble with binaural when they listen to headphones, because when you can't figure out where something's coming from, you, without even knowing you do it, move your head a little
Hmm.
bit, and that completely helps you localize. So the idea behind the Apple head tracking spatialized audio is that they add that. Now when you do it with audio that goes along with video, that makes life really, really easy, because the
Hmm.
front is always where the picture is,
Right.
always. So if you're watching something on your iPad and you're looking at it with your AirPod Maxes on, with the gyroscopes and all the rest of the stuff, it knows you're looking at the screen. So if you move your head to the right, the gyroscopes and everything inside the headphones know you've moved your head. So it will shift the audio to the left a little bit.
Right.
And then when you look back, it comes forward. That's all great and works really well, especially because visual cues will help you set up spatial stuff really easily. But what do you do with music when you got the thing in your back pocket? Like, what way are you
Right.
facing? And what, like, if I
Hmm.
make a left turn because I'm walking inside of a building and I got to make a left down that hallway, well, do I turn the audio and leave it sideways the whole time you walk down that hallway? No, you kind of have to bring it back. So it's a lot more complicated, but the whole idea behind it is to give you some of the head movement cues that will help you locate audio within the binaural stream that you're listening to.
Hmm. Very cool.
So
Okay.
that's that.
We have a question which I think would be really good to go over here. And uh, oh, hold on a minute. Okay, so this is something to address, and it's kind of zooming pretty far out. Like we're really in the weeds right now, and we're gonna go pretty far out
Yeah,
here. But
I live in the weeds.
um, okay, you're like literally no. Okay, so this is from Karen Bassett, and Karen asks, "Are people going to have an Atmos system installed in their home? Most people listen on earbuds these days, or gasp their cell phone speaker." So I think that to answer some of these questions and how relevant is this to us, I think we do actually have to kind of back up and go to the, well, we had quad at one point and that failed because, and then surround failed because, but this could work because, you know.
Wait, maybe you
Oh,
can hear me. There I
there
am.
we
I'm back.
go. Yep,
Okay,
you're back.
like we were saying earlier, the thing about quad and 5.1 is to listen to them, you needed a quad or a 5.1 setup. So when Karen's asking, will people have an Atmos system installed in their phone when they're listening on earbuds? Well, AirPod Pros and AirPod Maxes are full Atmos capable with head tracking
Hmm.
playback systems. Any pair of headphones is a binaural playback system. So the binaural part, everybody already has. All new Macs, even on their built in speakers, support Atmos.
Hmm.
They are throwing sound all over the place. And like I was saying before, Amazon Echo speakers, for what it's worth, do it. There are lots of different sound bars that have Atmos built in. So even if you don't surround yourself with speakers and you don't put speakers hanging from the ceiling, a lot of the more modern playback things that you can get that aren't even that expensive will have some version of Atmos decoding, and they might have extra tweeters to bounce stuff off the walls or whatever they do. They listen to their acoustic environment, and they're ridiculously smart for what they
Mm-hmm.
do. And then once they know the environment they're in, they will attempt to send audio out in ways that will make you feel more immersed than it would be if it was just a mono speaker sitting on your desk playing stuff back.
Right.
So, yeah. Will lots of people have 914 systems in their homes? I doubt it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
you can build a 5.1 system out of Sonos with a sound bar, a sub, and two little speakers at the back, and it sounds awesome.
Hmm.
It sounds
I have
great.
not heard that. Nice.
So, I mean, that's what I've
Yeah.
got where we watch TV. That's it.
Yeah. Wow. Huh. I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds
And
interesting.
it's
Yeah.
because it's an object-based system that it can translate to any playback system. If you decode the Atmos, it will figure out the best way to represent what was mixed on whatever playback system you've got. And I'm not saying it's going to work on two old school speakers and be awesome necessarily, but
Mm-hmm.
it also won't be destroyed. It won't be like you've got the 5.1 mix, but you only get to hear what was coming out of the left and right. It will fold everything down to the left and right speaker, and you will get a version, which is why it's important to check out your re-renders. What that's for is to hear what people will hear when they have smaller speaker
Right.
setups than you have.
Right. Okay. So, two things about that. So, first one is I think that that's the best explanation I've heard about why this can translate to somebody who doesn't have a massive theater system, because of the object orientation and hearing how it collapses down. Uh, Next to that, so how often are you checking the re-renders and comparing playback systems on it?
I check the binaural and stereo re-render a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I switch back and forth. I've got a monitor controller that will switch sources, and the three that are up for my headphones at all times when I'm working in Atmos is the original stereo mix, the stereo re-render, and the binaural.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm constantly going between those three. And the original stereo mix is a really important one to have. And
Right.
you'll notice in this session, the stereo mix is turned down 7 dB
Right.
because it has to be. Oh, feedback. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Um, because that's what will level match it with the -18 ADM file. And
Mm.
as much as I would love to push the ADM, for better or for worse, there is a limiter built into the renderer, which supposedly is the same limiter that you'll get on playback when you start crashing down to fewer channels. And there are better limiters. And I think part of it is because it can't have a huge delay on.
Mm-hmm. He's coming
And
back.
again,
There he is.
why are we
Nice.
frozen? So there is a limiter to keep it from just distorting the hell out of everything, but it's not a good sounding limiter because there's no look ahead, there's no tweaking, it's just a limiter. So you've got to stick to your -18 for stuff to sound good and for that to match most stereo mixes, especially for me. I'm coming down at least 7 dB, maybe more. So that is
Mm-hmm.
an important thing to keep in mind.
Right. Right. Yeah, I was gonna ask. You won the loudness war, so now you're back to -18.
Yeah, but I haven't delivered a stereo mix at -18. No way.
Hmm.
I
Right.
mean, they're better than they used to be. I'm not at -6 anymore, but
Oh, he's
minus
coming back.
11
There he is.
ish. This
Yeah.
one, this song was at -11.
Hmm.
And there's stuff that's louder. So you just have to level match with gain. That's your only
Sure.
choice.
Yeah. Okay. So we have uh, a couple more questions to kind of jump into here. And this one's pretty important. Uh, ooh, that one's actually really good. So Moog Music has two questions for us.
All
Uh,
right.
and I'm wondering when the first Atmos synth is coming. Uh, so question for you guys. And the first one is, do you have any tips on how to use twizzle flangers within a mix?
If I knew what a twizzle flanger was.
All
Dude,
right, and then they're
but
helping
this
us
is
out with the.
from
Oh wait, here's their other one.
why are we freezing so much?
I know, yeah.
Um, so okay, so the real question is, how do time-based effects like phasers and flangers translate? Okay,
Hmm.
if you're not listening in binaural, they will translate exactly how they would in any multi-channel format mix, because the way you crash down from, let's say, 914 to something smaller is it's just a chart of coefficients that says, okay, you don't have height speakers, take those, turn them down 3 dB each and
Mm,
put them in the four corner speakers. Like whatever, I just made that up, but that's
right.
something like what it's going to be. So you work your way down to whatever the number of speakers you have, just with level. That's it.
Okay.
And that's why you have to be at minus 18, because you're going to keep going up. Man, we are freezing a
Yeah,
lot.
it's happening a lot. Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah.
Um, so when you're in binaural, you obviously have phase stuff going on and some ambient stuff to move things further away. But I have not noticed anything weird with that type of effect. If anything, your phaser gets phasier.
Hmm.
Like it's cool. I really haven't noticed it. And I do use effects like that, not on every single mix, but I'm a big fan of phasers and flangers, and I haven't noticed any problems. Here is something though. Here's something I will tell you for free. Is think about for your binaural for a second the difference between something that is equal in the left right and something that is in the center.
Oh man, freezing again.
I'm waiting until we come
There you
back
go.
because this is important. Okay,
Yeah.
when you're equal loudness left and right, you get what's called a phantom center, right? And if you just mix in stereo, you use the phantom center all the time. Your kick, your bass, your vocal, all that shit is in the middle. But it isn't in the middle, is it? It's just equal in your left and right speaker.
Hmm.
Okay, when you are binauralizing that, it is very different to algorithmically decide what something is going to sound like coming from 2 point sources that are supposed to be exactly equidistant through a room to get to you. Your brain gets rid of all of that ambience and you just hear it as not being that different from listening to headphones, right? It's
Right.
just right there, left and right. It's very different to take two sound sources and calculate some shit as they travel through the air to get to you to make a binaural version of that than it is to take a single point source from the center and have it come to you and hit both ears at the same time. That's where you'll actually find the biggest difference in dealing with. I mean, I'm saying I call it this, but I want to define it: the front wall, which is the left, center,
Hmm.
right. Dealing with the left, center, right, as you do any surround mixing, but especially binaural, is critical. And I think when Apple Music launched and they had all this content, there were some mixes that sounded crazy, like the drums were in the next room. And I
Right.
think some of that, when you were in binaural, was the fact that the quick way to do an Atmos mix of a song is to get stereo mix stems and just slam them up and do some panning and add some effects and then you print it. But your kick is stereo, snare stereo, dry lead vocal is stereo. Everything is stereo. And if you leave it hard left right with phantom center, on speakers, you'll never know the difference. In binaural, totally different. And it's different between streaming the Dolby binaural, which is what you get if you listen to Tidal, or the Apple spatialization, which is what you get when you listen to Apple. So be very, very careful about true center versus phantom center when you're setting up your Atmos mixes, because that is where things can get destroyed the easiest, that I've found at least.
Right.
Once you're out in the weeds and other speakers, like it doesn't matter. Like your fan
Be back in a moment.
frozen.
There
Okay,
he is.
your phantom center that's behind you, who gives a shit? Like you don't even have
Mm.
a speaker back there, so it doesn't matter. But your left, center, right, that front wall is super important. And the one thing I would say is that some mixers has started turning off the binaural settings. So you remember you've got near, mid, and far. for
Right.
the binaural settings, but you also have off, which basically just says don't binauralize this. It's the easiest way to get your binaural mix to sound like your stereo mix, but that's because it isn't a binaural mix anymore. So try
Right.
as hard as you can to leave that on, even if it's all on.
No. And then my camera.
Frozen.
Pandemonium.
Okay. Yeah, try really, really hard to leave that on. And here's the reasoning behind that. You could say, well, yeah, but it sounds better if I turn it off. So I'm just going to turn it off. Who cares? It'll sound better. But the binaural encoding on these things is fluid. It's like MP3 encoding and AAC encoding. It will continue to get better and better and better. So
Mhm.
leave as much binaural information as you can, or eventually what could happen is your mix, when people listen to it, once binaural has gotten fucking awesome, will be
Mhm.
like, oh man, that's one of those 2020 mixes that didn't have any of the binaural information on it. That sounds boring now. Like,
Right.
the binaural will get better and better, and it is a playback real-time encoding thing that can be improved. It's not like you would have to go back and reprint your mixes. It's made every time from the ADM or the MP4, which is a smaller version, which is what they use to actually stream. So
Right.
try and stick with the binaural, but don't use phantom center on things. And I think you'll have a lot more success making your binaural feel present the way the
Mhm.
stereo mix does in
Right.
headphones.
Right. Awesome. So yeah, Steve Janowick said in the comments that binaural is changing literally every day right now with
Mm-hmm.
what he's seeing. He also added great quick explanation to beds. When you hear Andrew refer to a bed, if you're tuning in later, beds are a speaker configuration. Objects are places in space. So
Yeah.
awesome.
Thanks, Steve.
Um, yeah. So quick question for any maybe like live sound guys that might be thinking about phase relationship when you introduce multiple speakers into a playback system like this. So can can you kind of, I guess, quickly summarize like how the actual calibration of a system this large is done?
Yeah, it's actually really simple. You just have Dolby come and set it up. No, I'm
Yeah,
joking.
perfect.
It's it's you have to calibrate the system. You cannot put this many speakers into a room and just
Yeah,
hope for the best.
yeah.
Now that said, I was shocked at how good it sounded just when I put the speakers up. But EQing the speakers is a big deal. There are recommended Dolby curves for things, but I would argue a little bit that you should just listen to your shit on headphones, and if it sounds good to you and it translates well, don't worry too much about the EQ curves,
Mm,
because all of the Dolby Atmos EQ curves were developed for theatrical, and it's super important that you stick to them. You have to stick to them, because there
mm,
are also level differences between sets of speakers as you move further back. Like, you cannot get that wrong. You have to set up your monitoring system exactly the way the spec is.
mm.
EQ, you just have to EQ your system so that stuff translates. Just like
Bet he's gonna say
Frozen,
stereo.
Frozen. Yeah,
Present.
but then again, a lot of people don't set their shit up right for stereo either.
Yeah.
No room is perfectly symmetrical. So technically, you should be doing time alignment between left and right, but you don't. You move your head
Right.
around and it's fine. Okay, so the two components are EQ and time alignment. Time alignment is really, really important. The way you do it is, I'll give you the basic setup, and then you've got to find software. And there's some software that makes this incredibly easy, but you could do it just by recording things back into Pro Tools.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say just set up a click track in Pro Tools, bus it directly to an audio track, and bus it to an output that goes, actually, bus it to an object. Put that
Mm,
object in your left speaker, hit record. You're going to get the bass line, which is the going through a bus inside of Pro Tools, and then you put a microphone at your listening position. Technically, you should have an array of microphones, and things will start to average out as you're, especially for doing EQ. EQing with
mm.
just one microphone is tricky because you're not where that microphone is. Your ears aren't
Right.
there. And if you move just a little bit, stuff changes. But let's just talk about time alignment. So you have a single microphone basically at the listening position. But the big thing is you want that microphone exactly equidistant from your left and right. So it's exactly in the center, because that's kind of your baseline for everything. So it's wherever you're going to sit as close as you can get to the middle of your left and right speaker, as far back from the center as you're normally going to be. Microphone there. Record the click through a bus, record it through the speaker to the microphone. Record that for every single speaker. Whichever speaker is closest will have the smallest delay between the bust click and the recorded click through the microphone. That's your baseline. You leave that speaker at 0. And then I think you can even do it in the renderer. I don't do my speaker alignment in the renderer, so I'm just looking here. But I believe, can you do delays in here? Not in the speaker setup. Hold on. Speaker calibration. Gain and delay. Yes, you can. So if you show the screen for a second.
Yes.
This is the speaker calibration page inside the renderer, which is just one of the option windows. So you can set level, but you can also set delay. And this is in milliseconds. So whichever speaker was first, and let's say it's probably going to be your center speaker, or it's going to be one of your left, center, right, because those should really be sort of equidistant the way you've got them set up. And then whatever the difference is between the shortest delay and the delay of the other speaker you're listening to, put that in this setting. And that will time align the arrival of signals, and that will take care of any weird phase stuff. You would think that there would be some comb filtering and things like that. Ooh, video feedback. I love it. You'd think that there would be more comb filtering and stuff, but I have never, ever, ever been bothered by it. And I wasn't bothered by it before the time alignment. So it's much more forgiving than you would think, which doesn't make much sense to me, but I'm all for it. It works great.
Right. Okay.
But that's the cheap man's way to go ahead and time align your speakers.
Yeah. It's pretty brilliant, actually, because I've definitely messed around with it in stereo and using different softwares. Even just like I don't know, like Room EQ Wizard and everything, and you actually like find out, it'll do a quick impulse and all that, and then, but yeah, just using a click track with Pro Tools is duh.
Yeah, I mean, you can get it down to the sample, and it's repeatable. So
right.
It's going to take you more work to do it that way, but it definitely works. Now, the Dolby guys did help me set up my room, and what they've got is they've got really cool measurement software, and it ran on a Mac, so you can get it. I don't know how much it costs it, but it's not an Audio Precision or anything like that. And they literally took Pink Noise. I think they were still running Pink Noise, and they had a cheap audio interface, and they ran it out of 2 outputs. One of the outputs they just looped back to the input, and the other output went to a speaker, and they had the microphone. And
was
it measured the time difference. What's that?
Oh, sorry. Was it smart by chance?
It might have been. It might have been.
Nice. Yeah. That's a popular one for big PAs and everything while we're waiting for Andrew to come back.
Yeah. So there's plenty of software that will do the measurement for you. But the reason I explained it the way I did is because that tells you exactly the concept of what the hell it is you're doing. So you don't try and figure out what the time is for every speaker. You just figure out what's the difference between direct and the speaker, and then that's your baseline. And all you need to know is what's the difference between the speakers. The absolute doesn't matter at all. It's just who's late.
Right. Okay, let's do
furthest away, and you don't touch that, and you delay all the other speakers. I said it backwards earlier,
and then because obviously you in the middle of your new explanation.
Sorry, I said it backwards earlier. Obviously, you take the time of the speaker that's furthest from you, and that's your baseline, and you delay all the other speakers to match that, not the closest speaker, because you can't undelay the other speakers. That's ridiculous.
Right.
I said it backwards.
Okay, we have a question while we're almost still in the stereo thing here. Okay, this one is from Shelly. Do you see that on your screen?
Yes.
While you are checking the stereo premix version against the Atmos version, how do you route the output of your stereo version? Direct to 2 output channels or to a bed inside the session?
Yeah, you definitely don't put your stereo version through the renderer. Definitely not. And it's why you kind of have to have some sort of monitor controller. You've got to have a way to switch between what it is you're listening to without relying on doing it inside of the Pro Tools session. You could do it inside the Pro Tools session, but it starts to get really messy. When you're mixing in stereo, like I always mix through my print track, and I just swap the input on that track to go between my live mix and my last printed mix or the rough mix or whatever. But because I'm not only listening to a stereo version of the renderer, I can't do the same thing. Now, if you're only listening to stereo, you could do that. You could route the stereo out of the renderer back to your print track instead of your mix bus. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just think of the renderer as a piece of outboard gear on your mix bus.
Right.
The problem
Right.
is it
Yeah.
usually is coming back wider than stereo. So
Right.
it helps to have a monitor controller. So what I use, I mean, we could talk about the specific hardware I've got. It's going to take a while if you want to do that. Do we want to go through my setup
Everybody
real
loves
quick?
hardware. Yeah. I
Yeah.
wonder if
All right.
I should look for any basic questions before we move
Yeah.
onto
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Do that.
Okay. Yeah.
Because when I talk about my actual hardware setup, we'll get into some of the like weirder, more esoteric things about trying to work in Atmos that
Yeah.
you've got to figure out.
Okay. This one comes from a Vladimir Putin. Or am I saying it right?
Yeah.
So Vladimir wants to know, if you had one shot, one opportunity to seize everything you wanted in one moment, would you capture it or just let it slip? And I
Is this a
thought he was
lyric
going to
I'm not
have,
recognizing?
yeah, I thought it was the Eminem song, but I think Vladimir got it wrong. So, Mom Spaghetti is the answer, Vladimir. Uh,
42 or Mom
42.
Spaghetti. Yeah.
Yeah. uh, okay. And this one is from Alex. Alex asks, how is this going to affect small or home producers?
I don't think it will. I mean, look, at the moment, you can still just deliver stereo.
Mm-hmm.
There are labels that require Atmos, but they're not expecting every mixer on the planet to be able to deliver Atmos. So what they will ask you to do is to deliver mix stems that
Mm-hmm.
can go off to somebody who can make the Atmos mix. The way it should affect smaller home producers is to start thinking about what you want to do in Atmos. There's a really good
Yeah.
article with Dave Way, who set up his Atmos setup, and then he was tracking, I think it was some stuff with John Doe. I can't remember exactly who it was, where he was tracking, thinking about Atmos. He was setting up extra microphones.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like, if you think about, just really briefly, we'll go left turn and talk about, well, okay, I need to do a reverb in Atmos. And you think like, oh, I got to go get a multi-channel reverb right now. Well, yeah, you could do a multi-channel reverb, but why don't you just do 3 stereo reverbs? One that goes to the left, right, one that goes to the sides, one that goes to the rears. And you could have slightly longer times in those 3 reverbs as they go back, like 3 copies of Valhalla or whatever. It doesn't matter what they are. Or what about the UAD Oceanway plugin, which gives you 3 different sets of microphones,
Yeah.
near, mid, and far? We'll have 3 Oceanways set up stereo, and it's all off one send.
Yeah.
Have 3 stereo delays, and the ones in the back have less top end than the ones in the front and have a little more regen, and stuff just sweeps
Yeah.
to the back of the room.
Oh my
But
gosh.
it's just a vocal slap. So your
Yeah.
effects don't need to be gigantic multi-channel things. And in fact, I've had better luck setting stuff up with revibe than a lot of the crazy multi-channel reverbs.
Mm-hmm.
Just for whatever reason, it works for me. And the Valhalla plate, I've done like a 6-channel plate with that, and
Yeah.
you can make it with anything. Don't think you need Atmos specific production tools. Just think about how fucking cool would it be if the brass were changing position, like the trumpet player is just running around the room. Like,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
cool. So now I
Yeah.
can make that happen.
So talking about this stuff definitely goes from the like, how the hell does this work? Like, what's the routing? I got to think about, okay, this thing's, all of that
Yeah,
stuff. Then it gets really fun, and I got to go
really
try it out to see about.
fun.
All right, just kidding.
Yeah, it's really, really fun. So I think the way it should affect you is you should just start thinking about how you can do it and how much fun you can have doing it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely uh, sounding pretty cool. Like, I mean, it's just another tool, right? Like everything that we try to do as mixers or musicians or everything is just how can we connect with people, and this is just another way of
Yeah.
getting into a
And
deeper sense. Yeah.
up until now, any multi-channel format, you were mixing for very, very few people.
Yeah.
But with the binaural component, especially as it gets better, you're mixing for everybody in the world who's got a phone,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
because you don't need the AirPods Pro and AirPods Max for Apple stuff gives you the head tracking and their version of spatial audio.
Hmm.
Any headphone playback is binaural by
Right.
definition. So
Right.
you don't need special headphones to hear the binaural mix. Any
Yeah.
pair of headphones will do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think one thing that's kind of important because I have seen things in forums and everything of people saying oh, this is a gimmick, it's ridiculous, what are you going to do, like always have the singer flying around your head and all of that stuff. But
No,
yeah,
no.
just like you're saying, like with the arrays of microphones, I've done things where like the artist wanted to have it sound like they were walking out of the studio while they were singing, and they wanted to hear the car door or the studio door shut, and they wanted like the depth and everything. So it was like trying to accomplish that in stereo. But if it was also I want to
Yeah.
walk past
Man,
you. There's so
there's
many
a great
things.
article with Steve Albini talking about setting up like 4 or 5 different microphones for the singer, and one of them was inside a bucket. And like, well,
Yeah.
why not do the same thing just for spatial shit? You don't
Yeah.
have to be gimmicky. When I was like years and years ago, I was able to work on a Fabulous Thunderbirds live DVD mix with Ed Cherney.
Hmm.
5-1. We had to do 5-1. And this was when 5-1 was pretty new. And it was a live concert, and he's like, I'm not doing anything crazy, but he built this wall
Hmm.
of sound. So the band was in the front. You never felt like they weren't. There was nothing
Hmm.
gimmicky. But man, the stereo version sounded tiny compared to the 5-1.
Wow. Wow.
Absolutely tiny. And that's what you can do. You can do crazy stuff if it's called for, but it's just like the background vocals wrap around you a little bit instead of just being
Yeah.
hard pan.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Let's, so we do have questions piling up, but I think it would be great to talk about your personal setup.
Okay.
So we've
So,
kind of gone through this, everybody. Like you can do it with headphones. You could go download the renderer now and try it if you have Pro Tools and or another DAW that actually works with it. So it is something that you can do without having Andrew set up, but we want to see your setup.
well, we're not going to see it. We're just going to talk about it because I'm not
Okay.
going to move the camera around. But okay. So the most basic setup is Pro Tools. You set your playback engine to the Dolby Audio Bridge. That sends all your audio into the Dolby Renderer program, which can be running on the same computer. And then the output of the Dolby Renderer application is what feeds your speakers. And like we talked about before, you don't even need to have a monitor controller. There's a volume pot in the Dolby Renderer that's just sitting at the top of the window. And there you go. So that's the simplest version of this. Okay. I don't have the simplest version of this. I have the really fucking crazy version of this. And there are a few reasons for it. One is because here's that volume pot I was talking about before. So that can be your monitor pot. And you could hook your speakers directly up to your audio interface, and that's it. Um, and if you go into the preferences, you literally set input audio device and output audio device. Now, I'm running the renderer on a separate Mac Mini, which for reasons I will get to in a second. In fact, I can get to it right now. The Dolby renderer runs at 48K and 96K, and that's it. And the reality is, you can't deliver a 96K ADM to anybody. They don't want them. They want a 48K ADM. And ADM is that multi-channel wave file with all the panning metadata and all that crap that actually is the deliverable. It's the equivalent of the stereo wave file, but it's the Atmos file. So the renderer really wants to run at 48K. If you have the renderer running on the same computer, that means your Pro Tools session has to be at 48K, right? Because the audio is going directly from one piece of software to another through core audio. There's no sample rate conversion on that. So that means that your sessions have to be at 48. I get stuff to mix at every sample rate known to man, basically. And I don't want to have to sample rate convert the sessions, especially because I never do that for the stereo. If they've tracked it at 96, I mix at 96. I've even got a couple of things in the last couple of months at 44.1, whatever. But then I mix at 44.1 because to me, Sometimes I'll go from 44.1 to 48 if I just feel like for some reason it's fighting me. But generally, I feel like there's less damage done by leaving all the audio exactly as it is than to sample rate convert it. If you're capturing something from scratch and you know you're going to be doing something for Atmos, then work at 48 and it makes life easy. Okay, so because I didn't want to do that, all of a sudden my setup got stupid, like really, really stupid. So I have an HDX system using the HDX hybrid engine, which we're not going to talk about tonight, but it is the second coming of HDX cards. It is the best thing Avid has done in years and years and years, and it's why I can still run gigantic sessions on my iMac Pro, and it doesn't even break a sweat anymore. So I've got HDX cards, but the mixer is running native. Then for my audio hardware, I have an Avid Matrix, not the Matrix Studio. I've got the big boy. And there are reasons for that. And I priced everything out and I could have probably saved some money by doing certain things certain ways, but it all would have been much more kludgy and not as streamlined and not as simple, and there would have been certain things I couldn't do. So here, I'll bring up Dadman, which is the software that actually runs the Matrix. So up here, I've got an A to D and D to A's, so I can record microphones. And like, this is the microphone input I use to record the intros and outros to the podcast. And I've also got my modular coming in. Now, notice inputs 1 and 2 are modular because they're the important ones. And because
And
I'm just here and I'm not tracking bands here, 8 inputs is fine. So that's the analog IO on there. Then this is the monitor. This is the money. This is the matrix of stuff. But down the left here, you can see what cards I have in my matrix. I've got my A to D. There's built-in AES EBU. Then there are Digilink cards. So I have 3 HDX cards. And the reason is, if you put the renderer on a second machine, you have to have 128 channels of audio going to that second machine to be able to use 128 objects. Each object is an audio input. So I've got 128 outputs of Pro Tools cards mapping to 128 inputs of the renderer machine. And so that is on Dante. So Digilink routing to Dante, and then Dante is mind-blowing. I don't understand how it can possibly work, because it is basically thousands of audio channels up to 192K, and you can have multiple sample rates coexisting at the same time, which is how I managed to get around the 48K thing, on 10 base T, or well, it wants to be faster, 100 base T gigabit Ethernet, but it's like Cat 6E cables. It's not anything crazy. You don't need fiber. So I've just got like a Cisco managed switch because I decided I wanted a really good router for this, but you could just use a Belkin switch and just plug all the Ethernet in and everything talks to everything. So my first 128 outputs of Pro Tools just take up the 2 HDX cards, and they're just routed out to, this is got to scroll it to see it. Right, go to 128 inputs on the Mac Mini. On my Mac Mini, I've got this PCIe card in a little chassis that is 128 inputs and outputs. That's it. It is a PCI card that just has Ethernet connectors on it. So it is a Dante audio interface. So that gets my 128 channels into the renderer, and then back out of the renderer into this PCI card and back over here. And then that comes back in and is what feeds my monitor setup. So here are all my re-renders that I showed you before, right? I showed you long ago. I'm not going to go back and do it, but that the 7.1 re-render out of the Dolby Render software starts at output 17, and there it is. So it starts at 17 and it comes in here, and then that makes its way up into the monitor matrix. So this looks really confusing if you've never seen it before. It's very complicated in that you can route audio from anywhere to anywhere, but it is so insanely powerful and it remembers everything. You can unplug a device, plug it back in 3 years later, as long as nothing has changed names, it will reconnect itself to everything it was supposed to connect to, and everything just works. So it doesn't matter if you turn something on or off or disconnect stuff, and then when you plug it in next time, it will just hook itself up. It takes a while to get your head around it and set it up, but then it just works brilliantly. Okay. The thing is, what is feeding the renderer? So I've go from Pro Tools card to the Dante card, and my Dante card, if we look down here, I've got my main Dante, which is hooked up to things that are not the Dolby renderer. This is just some extra Dante stuff hooked up. Will follow the sample rate of the session. So if I open up an 88.2 session, most of the Dante network just switches to 88.2, and everybody talks to everybody else, and it's super happy. The renderer would not be happy. This Dante expansion card, and this is why I'm on the Matrix Studio, not why I'm on the full-blown Matrix, not the Matrix Studio. This Dante expansion card has built-in sample rate conversion, and I can fix it to 48K. And the real-time sample rate conversion is astounding. I have to say that the Matrix interface, A to D's, D to A's, sample rate conversion, all of it is the best sounding interface I've ever used. It's insane how good it sounds. So the idea that I'm sample rate converting in and out of the renderer if I'm not working on a 48K session sounds like that would take a huge sonic hit. I can't tell the difference between 48K with sample rate conversion and 48K without it. It is that transparent. It is genius. So that part of my Dante network is always running at 48K, and that way the renderer is always at 48K no matter what sample rate my session is. That was super complicated. That's only for me because I'm a geek and because I don't want to sample rate convert my stuff. You don't need to do that. If you work at 48K inside Pro Tools, the renderer will be very happy whether it's on another computer or the same computer, and it will work just fine. I just didn't want to have to sample rate stuff that was at other sample rates. Okay, the other thing the Matrix gives me is it gives me a full-blown monitor controller, and this is where the EQ curves are for all of my speakers. So all of the EQing that's being done in the room is being done six channels of EQ. I can't remember what.
Sorry, you froze for a second. So yeah, all of the EQing is being done.
Yeah, so all the EQing is being done inside of the Matrix, and also all of the delays are being done inside of the Matrix. So it's the monitor controller here is taking care of what you can do some of in the renderer, like if you do your speaker calibration guy here, and you can do delays here. You can't do EQ curves here, but there are other places you could do it. But all of my EQing and monitor setup stuff is done inside of the Matrix. And then actually here, let's see. I don't really see the delays going. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Then I define lots of different inputs. And this goes back to the question before about, well, how do you listen to different things easily? I've got all of these inputs are available for my speakers. So this is the renderer output. So this is the 914 output that's coming out of this matrix of speakers because I have told it, if I look in my room setup, that I have 914. I haven't turned on these extra two in the front. I don't have the 6 extra I could have up top. So I told it I got a 914 and it goes, great. You've got 914, and when I choose physical monitoring, that's what I get. Now, I can fold down, basically do a re-render here by changing the monitor configuration. But what I do instead is what I showed you before. I've got re-renders running live. So I've got my 914 coming out that feeds the speakers. Then I've got a 7.1, a 5.1, and a stereo that all feed my monitor inputs. So here's my re-render 7.1, re-render 5.1, re-render 2.0. So those are my re-renders that are simultaneously coming out. So if I want to really quickly hear my mix in 5.1, I just select this guy. I want to go back to my Atmos, I select that guy. And I've got a little monitor controller that does the switching for me. So I can go between things by hitting buttons because I'm that kind of guy. But you can do this in the Pro Tools Control app. You can do it on a Pro Tools dock. You can do it by coming into the Dadman software. And then I have a separate output, which is headphones. That is an AES that's feeding my dangerous source. So I'm going AES into the back of that, using that as my D to A. And that can monitor Pro Tools Stereo, which is just two outputs that don't go to the renderer. So when I'm working in stereo, I don't use the renderer at all. I've got the iMac coming in because another ridiculously cool thing about Dante is there's a program, I think it's $29 or something, that's Dante Virtual Sound Card, that gives you up to a 32 channel IO core audio interface that just shows up on your Dante network. So I've got an 8-channel interface set up, and I can route my stereo out of my iMac of any program into my speakers directly through Dante. The Dante stuff makes things so flexible that you do not need a patch bay. I don't have a patch bay anymore. I don't need one. You can also mult stuff in Dante. So that Pro Tools Stereo goes lots of different places. One of the places it goes is to the AES for the headphone monitoring, but it also goes other places to be printed, or it can show up on the iMac speakers or whatever I want to do. Okay, anyway, so then my headphone monitoring, I can be switching between the Pro Tools Stereo, the iMac, or I've got the binaural here, and here's the stereo. And then I've got a couple other things that I've been messing with. So the main setup is my iMac Pro with an HDX3 and a Matrix. Then that goes Dante out to a Focusrite Dante card that's in a chassis on a Mac Mini that's running the renderer. Then I come back out of the renderer onto the Dante, back into the Matrix, and then that gets routed around to go to my speakers and to my headphones and all my other stuff that it has to go to. That's the basics of the setup. I've got other weirder things set up. I've got, there's Focusrite X2P, which is, they actually show you a little picture of it. It's
that's
just
the basics, everyone.
Yeah,
the
that's the basics. And the reason I did it was so that I didn't have to sample rate convert the sessions.
Right.
That became a big deal to me, and maybe it wouldn't have been a big deal, but the thought of having to generate all of that extra audio every single time, where now I'll be mixing at 88.2 and I'll just flip over into the render and chuck some stuff in Atmos just to kind of hear things and then go back to stereo. So because I've got Dante, then I could get this Focusrite X2P, which is what's sitting on top of the modular. So I've got a headphone amp at the back of the room that can have anything that's on the Dante going to it, and it sounds really good. I've also got a 16 channel Focusrite line. It has 16 line in and out. Sorry, can't speak anymore. But then Dante as well. That I have hooked up to all sorts of different things, like guitar pedals. The modular has extra outputs coming in here that aren't going into the A to D on the Matrix, as well as I've actually got a workflow set up. I've only done it a couple of times where I can take a microphone into the A to D, or a DI into the A to D on the Matrix, route it through Dante to the red 16 line, then it comes light pipe out of the red 16 into my Apollo X8P with real-time UAD plugins running, back out light pipe from the Apollo to the red 16 to Dante to Pro Tools, and I can just put an Ampeg SVT on a bass I'm recording, and the latency is nothing. And it's the UAD stuff in real time tracked. But that's because I'm a geek. You don't
That
need to
is
do
amazing.
any of this, but it works.
That's genius.
And it's like zero latency
Oh my
through
gosh.
the UAD plugins through the console app back out into Pro Tools.
I'm gonna go do it right now. See it.
Yeah.
All right, sorry. Gotta stop doing that. Everybody's gonna leave.
So, okay, now there's another piece of the puzzle, and I'm surprised no one has asked this question yet. And the question that this answers is, well, how do I listen to like Apple Music Atmos on my Atmos mixing system? I've got this gigantic set of PMCs, and I want to hear Apple Music on it. It turns out that is so fucking hard and expensive that it makes me want to vomit. So what you need you need the trifecta of something that has an Atmos chip inside of it that can decode it, that turns it into multi-channel audio,
Mm.
not
Right.
binaural, that you can then get into your monitor controller and route it to the
Mm.
speakers. That's really hard. The ways to do it that work are you use consumer Atmos enabled preamp.
Mm-hmm.
Makes one that is
Sorry,
easy.
it froze on you at preamp.
Oh. So
Consumer
you
preamp.
use a consumer preamp. So Marantz makes a couple of them where you can get Atmos in through HDMI, and then it will spit out up to 16 channels of analog audio on XLRs that you can use to drive speakers. The problem with that is you then have to go back into an A to D. So you would hook that up to one of those like red 16 lines, which is a good sounding interface, but you've just gone through a D to A conversion and then an A to D conversion. You're not necessarily level matched. Your volume control is before the D to A, and then you're coming back in and going to the monitor controller on through another knob. It's not the best thing in the world. So I found this JBL SDP55, which has the holy grail of Atmos enabled HDMI in and Dante out. And so it is a preamp that's sitting on the table. And yes, it is very, very expensive. But if you add up all of the pieces you need to make it using a Marantz and then
Mm-hmm.
the Red 16 and then the blah, 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 it actually isn't a whole lot more expensive than doing that. And it sounds amazing. And you can stream Bluetooth off your phone to it. And it's a really great, great, great preamp, but it costs a lot of money. But that is the way I do it. So I listen to Apple Music on my Apple TV, which goes HDMI into this amp, and it just shows up as this monitor source right here. Turn it on, and I've got full discrete Atmos through my PMCs, so I can hear what everybody else is doing in Atmos, and then feel terrible about myself because none of my stuff sounds any good at all. Just like I can do in
Come
stereo.
on.
So I spent a lot of money to make myself feel horrible. So that was the last piece of the puzzle because it was really
Right.
important to me to be able to do that. Now, another question nobody has asked is, well, but how do I audition stuff, or how do I give it to a band to listen to? Okay, if you send an ADM to a band, they're not really going to be able to play it back unless they've got the Dolby renderer software. Then they can open it up and hit play, and it'll come out through the monitoring configuration. Obviously, that's not going to be an option for everybody. What you can do is you can convert the ADM file to an MP4, which takes the gigantic 128 channel with metadata thing and it makes it much, 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 much smaller. Then the practical side of how you can send it to a band so they can hear it, the easiest thing to do is on an iPhone. There are ways to do it on Android, but I don't know what they are yet. But if you send the file to somebody with an iPhone, they can save it to their iPhone, and then they can play it back using the music app, and that will do all of the Atmos decoding, and they can listen to the binaural. That's the way you do binaural mix checks with a band. You send them an MP4. One thing I would highly recommend is you also send them a level adjusted version of the stereo mix, because if to be at minus 18, you've had to turn your stereo mix down 7 dB. If they're A-Bing against the released stereo version, it will be 7 dB louder. That will sound a hell of a lot better, even if it doesn't actually sound better. So you have to explain at the very beginning of the process when you're working with somebody on Atmos mixes what the deal is with the level requirements, because you cannot get around them without risking your stuff sounding absolutely terrible down the line. You have to conform to the minus 18. I think that's it, really. Is there anything else? Well, oh, here, hold on. I got something else, which is because I show you what speakers I've got. So this
Oh,
is
yeah.
my left, right are the MB3 XPDAs, which are just phenomenal speakers. I have wanted these forever, and it turns out if you sell a Neve console and an entire room full of outboard gear, you too can get a pair of these speakers. They are absolutely fucking great. And then my center channel is a version of this without the extended bass cabinet. So my left and right are those, and then my center is that, and then the rest of the speakers are all these wafers, which are built as sort of industrial speakers. You can flush mount them inside walls, on walls, whatever. The great part is they weigh almost nothing.
Hmm.
And they're passive speakers. So you run some speaker wire to them and you use an amplifier. And then what amplifier you're going to use? Well, this again, this is an expensive amplifier. I'm using the 88C06 version, I believe. It's an 8-channel amplifier that has Dante input. So other than the sample rate conversion going to and from the renderer, if I'm not working at 48, I have a true fully digital chain all the way from Pro Tools to the amplifier, and then it's converted to analog and put out of the speakers.
Yeah.
You can do it much cheaper. There are lots of other options. I just decided I wanted to do this at once, and I didn't want to upgrade anything. And I'm definitely not going to be upgrading. This is awesome and works great. You do not need to do it as crazily as I did it.
Yeah. Andrew,
but
you
if
have
you
a
guys
really
have
good
needs
picture.
to sell, then, feel free. Feedback.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
You're getting feedback now? All
No,
right.
the video feedback.
Oh, right.
I'm in a
Sorry,
90s video.
I was looking at your Instagram. You have a really good picture of your room on Instagram, actually, so people could
Oh, good.
see
Yeah,
this.
it's just fisheye lens off the. It's hard to photograph because it's a small room. But
here, I'll show you guys here. Let's see if this will work. Hold on. It's first.
You should show the picture of the slug. Actually,
here we go.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Show the slug though, because that's cooler.
Right, hold on. Where's the slug? Slug.
It's pretty recent. There you go. That slug.
Yes. Here we go.
That slug is insane. That guy was huge.
Is that a rock? That's a rock, right?
Yeah, it's going down like a bit of sandstone. And the stupidest thing was it got down there, and where it's going was a patio with like no green things on it. So it had to do a U-turn. And it just took forever. It was like the whole time we were eating dinner, this guy was turning around and getting back up that bit of rock.
And you named him Kev.
Yeah.
Or was there more to this? Yeah, just Kev. Oh,
no, that's it. Just we named him Kev.
Nice.
Kev the slug.
Excruciating. Band name, nice.
Yeah. Slugs of Worcestershire.
Awesome.
There you go.
That's great. All right, let me put the speakers back up. Sorry. Awesome. Yeah, so here's the height channels up there.
Yeah.
And the rears are closer to you than I would have thought.
No, those are the wides.
Or the wides,
so
sorry. Yeah.
That's what I was talking about before.
Yeah,
originally I thought that those wides should go out to the wall. You can't really see the sides, because the side ones, there's one just next to that couch. So they're all the way back against the wall. But the way the wides work is they are to extend the width of the front wall, which is, I defined that as the left, center, right. That's what the wides are supposed to do. They're not supposed to be several feet away from the left and right speaker. They're supposed to be extensions of the left and right.
I suppose that would be deceptive too if it were so far away.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, your delay calibration would be different on them, and technically it would sort of sound the same. But I think the idea is they are supposed to be as present as the left, center, right. So you don't want them further away.
Wow.
They're just supposed to give you a wider front wall with a little more control.
Right. Even that seems fun to mix on, just the U shape of that with the wides and the left, center, right.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It really is. And as soon as you build the first effect that works for you to spread something around the room without it being crazy, it gets really, really fun. It really does.
Oh, man.
And I know that at the moment, I'm mixing for 11 people in the world who are going to listen back on large speaker setups. Hopefully those 11 people will appreciate it, and everybody else will get the binaural or the slightly smaller version of it, and that will work. And like Steve said, that stuff is getting better every single day.
Right. All right. Let's see. I'm still thinking about the Dante routing to effects chains thing. And
the Dante thing is insane. Dante
really
is
cool.
Dante's, it's like magic. Like, how the fuck does that work?
Right. Yeah.
I've also just realized that normally. What's that?
Maybe we should do one of these on Dante at some point. Might be a shorter one, but
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, look, I can just show you. Like, this is Dante controller.
Let me put you up here.
So this is the Matrix takes care of all of its internal stuff, but once you get onto the Dante network, these are just all of my Dante devices. So I got the iMac Pro, which, as I told you before, like an 8x8 virtual interface on my iMac, so it's just on the Ethernet and it works
Hmm.
fine. Then the Focusrite renderer IO, that's that Focusrite card 128 in and out of the Mac Mini. Then this is the built-in Matrix Dante. This is the renderer IO Dante. So this is the one with the sample rate conversion on it. Then I got that Red 16 line, which is feeding all kinds of things, but it's what's doing the crazy Dante to light pipe conversions to get in and out of the Apollo. And then this is the little headphone guy. And then
Hmm.
you've got all the same devices here, including the SDP55, and they just route places.
Yeah.
Like this, I'll show you the routing here. I'll actually just open this up. And it shows you that you've got these channels coming out of the SDP55, and I set that up to be the same as mine because it'll do up to 16, but I don't have that many speakers. So I just set it up to be my speaker setup. And then if I look at the built in Dante and I look at those inputs, what I should see, no, it's not that Dante. Oh no, it just goes into the Matrix. Oh, where is it? I can't even remember where it goes in. But the SDP55, there it is, just shows up and gets patched into that Dante interface. So
Yeah.
all your patching of Dante just happens in this app, and this app can be running on any computer on the network.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, for anybody going cross-eyed, this is completely running over Ethernet, and it's just two pieces of software. Like Andrew said, there basically sets up another sound device inside of your Mac. It's a core audio driver thing, right? And you can assign the output of your computer to a virtual Dante sound card. That would make that show up on the network. Other devices can show up on there. It can all run down one Ethernet cord. You
Yeah,
could have things
yeah,
all over your
it's
house. Yeah.
crazy. Yeah, I mean the hookup between, and obviously I'm going through a switch to get there, but you could literally
Hmm.
take one Cat 6 Ethernet cable and go between the Dante output of the Matrix and that Focusrite card on the renderer, and that's 128 channels of audio that sounds fantastic
Yeah.
and is clocked perfectly,
Yeah.
and it makes it there and back. That's two ways.
You could also put your actual home theater on your Dante network and go check your things out there. Although I don't know how much checking on different playback systems would you be doing with Atmos, because
None,
you're in a
and that's
calibrated
why,
situation.
and the
Yeah.
reason that's one of the reasons I really decided that I had to do the PMCs. I have no reason, like my tannoys are not set up in here. If you look at that picture, there
Yeah.
are no tannoys.
Right.
I don't need them anymore. I don't need to
Yeah.
switch to anything. The
Yeah.
PMCs and my headphones are all I will ever need to listen to mixes. Well, that's not true because I will actually take the stereo, either re-render out of the renderer or when I'm mixing in stereo, take the stereo mix, route it to the Dante virtual sound card as an input and listen on my iMac speakers because
Yeah.
that's a perfect consumer shitty way to listen to stuff.
Right. Right. All
And
right.
that all happens in
Uh,
Dante.
we are way far down the hole right now, and we have questions.
All
We
right,
can
let's do
we
questions
better
because
do some
I'm
questions.
realizing that on other Mondays when I'm interviewing people, I don't have to talk very much.
Right.
I've been
You're
talking
like,
for two and a
oh,
half hours and my
yeah,
throat's getting it. So,
yeah, awesome.
all right, let's get to it.
Uh, all right, so let's just do a basic one here. So this is true. I mean, there are a lot of people who haven't experienced Atmos at all, and don't know how to get it at home. So this is worth talking about for a minute. If
Okay.
those people are still with us, I'm surprised, but
Yeah, so there are
yeah.
a few different platforms that have Atmos music content.
Hmm.
So Apple Music has it. If there is an Atmos version of a song, when you listen to the song, that's what you get. If there
Hmm.
isn't, you get the stereo. Um, Amazon has lots of Atmos content on Amazon Music. It will only play back through their Amazon Echo speaker. So you don't have the option of taking that to other things.
Hmm.
Um, Tidal will stream Atmos binaural. And I believe that Deezer, which is a French company, I believe they do it. And I'm sure Spotify cannot be far behind. They can't get left out of the Amazon and Apple club. Like, it's just, I can't believe for a second that they're not about to do this. I don't know anything. So, in terms of actually listening to the content for binaural, that's the way you do it. Just on your phone or on your Mac or whatever, you listen to any of those things, or on your Echo speaker if you're going to listen to the Amazon stuff.
Mm.
If you want to listen on speakers, then it gets slightly more complicated. But if you've got an Apple TV 4K that has an Atmos chip inside of it, and its HDMI output will have Atmos audio. So if you have an Atmos enabled uh, sound, what the hell do they call sound bar?
Soundbar. Yeah.
That will play back the Atmos. And if you have a more complicated, like a system, a Sonos thing where you've added a couple of other speakers, the Sonos knows how to decode for that. Past that, you have to get into these more expensive Atmos enabled consumer preamps and then hook up your speakers. That's the only way to hear it on speakers, is to do a setup. And if you want to hear it on a studio setup, then you've got to do something stupid like I did and get this crazy expensive but amazing sounding STP-55. That's the professional way to do it. There are other ways to do it, but that's the way to get Atmos decoded onto a professional monitoring environment.
Yeah.
But home stereo wise, they're just stereos that have Atmos built in.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, so the in just a discussion of the viability of the format and stuff, there's a really good talk with I think it's Manny Marroquin, now I can't think of his name. Zane Lowe, is it?
Right.
And then Sylvia Massey was a part of that, and I think it was the day that Apple sort of dropped Atmos as a possibility on Apple Music. They talked a lot about why they think the format will survive and all of that on there. And obviously, there's doing a setup like that, and even taking the time out of your schedule to figure all of this out and decide to do it. That's a business decision for you, as as running your mixing business, and it's a significant purchase and a significant amount of time. So how do you feel? I mean, you obviously, through your actions, you feel pretty strongly about the format surviving and there being work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feelings like anything to expand on
and
there?
The reason is because it is not tied to a physical monitoring format.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why 5.1 and quad had a hard time.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't have the exact right setup, you weren't listening to it. Whereas Atmos can transfer to anything. And I strongly believe that the binaural component will get a million times better over the next several years. It has to.
Right.
It has to, because people are researching it constantly now.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So let's go to the next question here. And let's see what we have. Okay.
Is that my cat meowing, or is that your cat?
No, that is my cat. Yeah.
All right.
I'm sure somebody can hear that cat.
Right. Come on, let the cat in.
Yeah. I should let the cat in. All right, hold on one second. Let me tee up a question, and then I'll get the cat. Okay, so yeah, we just kind of covered that. So did you get? Oh, okay. Santiago asks. He says, "Hello, Andrew. Glad to have you back in our Mondays. Question: when you first decided to go into Atmos, did you get any of your colleagues to maybe send you one of their mixes, or their mixing sessions to check out how they work, or did you just start from scratch?" Get the cat.
I talked to a lot of people, and Greg Penny was really, really helpful from the get-go. Steve Genowick has been very helpful as well. Greg Wells as well. I've been sent a couple of people's mix templates. I haven't gotten anybody's mix session because you can't just send me the audio of someone else's record. But I have been very lucky to be shown some other people's templates, and I have stolen liberally from it. But what's great about it, like with everything, is it's just getting the concepts. You see, like building the 3 stereo reverbs that go further back in the room, as opposed to, oh God, I'll have to find a multi-channel reverb that I like. It hadn't occurred to me yet. So once that occurred to me, it was like, oh, and I didn't need to see anybody else's template for what they were doing there. It was just like, man,
Uh-oh, he's freezing. Froze on a good face that time.
Just
Oh, there
like
you
I
are.
get, yeah. So just like I get super excited about building a new effect in stereo, like, oh man, what if I pitch shift and reversed on the way into the reverb and then gated that with the thing, and I take an hour and a half and I build
Yeah,
it, and 90% of the time it sounds like ass, but then the other 10% of the time it's genius and it goes into my template and I keep it.
right,
That's happening with the Atmos stuff all the time. And it's like ways to make my life easy, which I'm always up for, and ways to make this stuff fun and
right.
quick. And yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of help and did a lot of talking to a lot of people early on. Hello.
This is Stinkers.
Stinkers.
Stinkers would like to start mixing in Atmos.
I think
So
Stinkers is going to
he's
need some
ready.
thumbs.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah. I think so. You can push
Yeah, it's an
at
opposable
least to
thumb
handle the
again.
mouse. He keeps on thinking it's the other kind of
He's
mouse.
very amenable though.
Yeah. Yeah. Very kind.
My guys would have been like clawing me at
Right.
that point.
Yeah.
So
Yep. All right.
yeah, so
Stinkers is
people have
gonna
been
say
really
bye,
helpful.
everybody.
I haven't been able to freezing. I've seen some template stuff. Yeah. Now Mark's gone. He's just ditched me. The cat cut the cord. I'm assuming we're still streaming.
We're still streaming. All right. Cool.
Yay!
Yay. Okay. Probably the most important question of the entire thing from Solomon. Does Atmos change the way you use parallel compression? You've got a lot of rear
Um,
buses now.
yeah, well, in my template, I've got a 7.0 rear bus. So, because
Yep.
I use multi-mono compression
Mm-hmm.
for the rear bus anyway, so to make it 7 channels was fine. I'm
Yeah.
using less and less parallel compression just in general, in stereo as well. I'm using
Mm.
less of it all the time. But no, and what's good about it is once you put something into an object, it can no longer go through a mix bus. It's impossible. But it can go to parallel stuff that goes into the bed. And as long as you make the panning follow what the object is doing on that A, it's not great. It's not necessarily the best way to do stuff. You just have to think about what you're doing. I mean, you have to think about it when you're doing it in stereo, but we're all so used to it that it's like everything is
Yeah.
second nature in stereo.
Right.
So you just have to keep track of what you're doing and be smart,
Right.
basically.
Okay. I mean, there's a whole thing to unwrap there about the stereo mix bus and everything. You know, you don't
But
have a
it's,
mix
well, that's
bus.
why I built my weird object bus, which is basically 914, so that if I need to, I can put stuff all over the room, but it will have mix bus processing on it.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, everything is multi-mono, but everything on my mix bus is multi-mono anyway, because I'm weird.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like that actually, but we'll keep moving through the questions. Okay. Let's okay, so sorry, some of
Stinkers
these
is
are
not happy.
he is not happy. You know what it is? It's 4:30 or it's past 4:30 and 4:30 is tuna time for Stinkers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He gets very upset if he doesn't have his 4:30 tuna. Let's see. And it's just he and I in the house right now,
Oh,
so
shit.
nobody
Well,
else.
let's say we're going to go for another 20 minutes, make it around 3
Yeah.
hours, and then it'll be tuna time.
Yeah. Otherwise, he's
I don't
going to
want to
find
piss
his
off
way through the
Stinkers.
door. Yeah, you don't. His manager will call your manager, and it's going to be a thing.
It'll fax me at the car phone.
Yeah.
It'll be
Yeah.
bloodbath.
Exactly. Okay. Okay. So this one's from Glenn. Do you consider Atmos mixing more fun, rewarding, or interesting than stereo? And then he says, or to put it another way, this feels like a pain in the butt to me as someone who's honed my skills as a stereo mixer for 30 plus years. Is this something to be excited about or annoyed by? Oh, and froze right on the start of the answer.
Well,
Sorry, you froze right at
are
the
we
start
back?
of the answer.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say both in a way. once you've got to figure it out. I spent 3 full days doing nothing but
Mhm.
trying to build an Atmos template based on my own template and based on the stuff I'd seen in other people's templates. I
Mhm.
have since spent hours and hours tweaking that template as I use it, because of course none of it was right from the get-go. But I built the tools, I named the buses. But just like for stereo mixing, just get your shit together at the beginning. Don't think you're going to figure it all out and build it as you mix, because then it will be a pain in the ass and it won't be fun. Get a template together,
Mhm.
and that template will change and evolve a lot, just like if you started building a stereo template, it would change and evolve a lot, and then it sort of settles down, and then it just becomes a creative thing when you change it. Once you're set up, once you're set up and your system works, and the stuff is super solid, like I don't think I've ever seen the renderer crash. Like that's
Mhm.
just not a thing. It's not like, oh, now I'm not getting all the audio channels. Like there's nothing frustrating at all about that.
That's cool. Yeah. Andy froze again. There we
Fucking, ah.
go.
Um, yeah. So the technology of it just works great, but you've got to decide how you're going to use it and set up a template so that you can be as fast as you are when you're mixing stereo. Once you do that, what's the difference? And it is so much fun. And you can basically do a stereo mix and just spread some things out. That's the way
Mhm.
some people do the Atmos, is just take advantage of the room a little bit, but not do anything crazy. Or you can go nuts with stuff, or just go nuts with one thing. Like you got a tambourine part and they do the little rattlesnake at the end. We'll pan that overhead. Like,
Yeah.
why not?
Yeah.
And that'll
Yeah.
be something where everybody's like, what the fuck just happened? And they'll listen to the mix again.
Right.
Just like when you do
Yeah.
something crazy with a delay or something in stereo. So you've got to spend the time to set it up. It is absolutely a learning curve,
Yeah.
but it isn't a technical learning curve. It's a creative learning curve. It's figuring out what you want to do with it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think you froze, or you're pausing. You're
Again,
frozen, I believe. There you
I just said it was rewarding.
are. Nice. It's very rewarding. There you go.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, and I mean, anything that you would do, you can do gimmicky things in stereo too. You know, like
Absolutely.
the argument about
And
it
you
being a
just
gimmick or whatever,
and you
it's
just
not
hope
really
that it
valid.
works. Whereas in
Yeah.
Atmos, you know it's going to work.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's helping to sell your gimmicky idea. Okay. AJ Teshin asks, are any musical elements forbidden to move about during a song?
By who? I mean,
Forbidden.
who would have forbidden it? No,
The
you can do
renderer.
whatever the hell you want. Obviously, the whole point of a mix is the listener's experience. So you might
Hmm.
not want to do stuff that's so distracting that it makes people nauseous, or just as like I don't even know what the hell the song is doing. So generally the core of the band doesn't move around a lot.
Hmm.
But no, you can do whatever the hell you want. Why not make the lead vocal move around the room if
Yeah.
it's appropriate for the song? Yeah. No, I mean that's like asking, am I allowed to compress my mix bus? Like you're allowed to do anything you want if
Yeah.
when people listen to it, that's what they want to hear.
Right. Yeah. I mean, same as having taste in the stereo format, I think, too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There are no rules about it. There are rules in terms of the level, the -18 thing.
mhm.
Obviously, you've got a mono sub, so your sub is not going to move around, but you can do full bandwidth audio into the other speakers. But the thing you need to keep in mind is if you're lucky and they've got multiple speakers, most likely they've only got good sounding stuff at the front.
Hmm.
So you
Right.
don't want to
Right.
rely on somebody having a great sounding speaker for the main guitar solo because you decided to put it rear right.
Right.
That's
Right.
not necessarily going to pay off.
Right. Yeah. You don't have the XBCs, are they?
XPDs? No, no, I got the
XBDs.
wafers
Yeah.
back there.
In your height
But
channels.
the wafers sound amazing. But yeah, I mean, so you want to be smart about like what people might hear when they listen back to your thing. But if it's binaural, well, whatever.
Right.
Everybody's
Right.
got headphones. They're the same. You don't have a right rear headphone. It just
Right.
So yeah, but
Yeah,
you just got to listen, just like anything else.
right. Okay, so our next one, let's see who this is. This is from Anthony Difford, and uh, he says, "Hello, Andrew. I've just retired as a live musician and set up a studio. I'm currently working on my first production. My question would be, am I wasting my time on stereo mixes, and would I be better off looking to work in a newer format?" So,
Well, as we said earlier, no. Stereo is going to be around for a while, and at the moment, it is still the standard. Atmos, hopefully, especially if the binaural gets really, really good and it can encapsulate a stereo mix, it could get to the point where the stereo mix is a component of the Atmos mix. Like that's possible,
mhm,
but that's not where we're at yet. So you're never wasting your time. But what I would say is important is to think about what the possibilities are in Atmos as you're producing so that you could say, like, you know what? Let's triple all the background vocals because then I can spread them out more in
mhm,
Atmos. Or let's double the guitar solo with the kazoo because I'm going to tuck that shit in and put it in the center speaker, even though the guitar is off to the right, and then it's going to go overhead or whatever. You'll start to have ideas about things that can actually affect the production that will work fine in stereo, but will really take advantage of the more immersive format.
right, right. Yeah. Okay. I just had a thought about it front far speakers or something like that would be a fun thing to have.
Well,
That's one of
you
my favorite
don't
things
get
with
those in
stereo mixing.
speakers. You don't get
Right.
them in speakers, but you absolutely get them in the binaural. Put it in the left and right on two objects and put those to far, and they
Hmm.
go behind the stuff that's near.
Ah,
And that's only in the binaural.
I want to do the joke about I'm going to go try it out, but I'm not. I'm just going to pass this time.
Well, that's because your cat will kill you if you waste any
Yes,
more time with that
exactly.
joke.
um, okay, so there is a question. Let's do two quick fire ones. So, what operating system is Andrew running on his Atmos Max? And is he running the latest Big Sur or an older OS? That's one
No,
got more.
I'm running Catalina 10.15.7 at the moment.
Mhm.
Um, I believe that all this now works, but like major operating system upgrades, I always wait a long time just so I don't have to deal with plugins. Like Catalina,
Yeah.
when it first came out, was a nightmare for Pro Tools. When I upgraded, it's the best operating system upgrade I ever did
Mhm.
because everything was worked out and everything worked faster. It was like getting a new computer. So yeah, I'll
Right.
be on Catalina. I'll probably skip Big Sur and go straight to Monterey whenever that works because when I do that, I would imagine that's when I'm going to get an M1X or an M2 thing. Like
Mhm.
my dream is that the M2 half size Mac Pro is an actual thing. Because when they were saying we're going to bring out the new Mac Pro, we're going to bring out, that's all I wanted. I wanted
Mhm.
like a kick ass Mac Mini with a couple of slots.
Same.
So if
Yeah.
they actually make that, because it's portable, you can pick it up, plug in a monitor anywhere, but you can stick it
Yeah.
in a suitcase easily, and it doesn't take up the whole suitcase.
Yeah. Or have it in a
So
machine room without a display running 24/7. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. The other one on that same kind of line is, how about all your buffer sizes?
How
So,
about it?
how about those buffer sizes? uh, how are your buffer sizes doing, Andrew?
They're fantastic. They're in need of tuna. I just run. I mean, just like if I'm working in stereo, the buffers set as low as I can go with everything playing back, and then when I get errors, I up the buffer size. And
Hmm.
the renderer doesn't come into it at all. It's like that's not part of what's going on. Atmos doesn't do anything to buffer sizes.
Yeah. Right. Uh, and you talked about it a little bit earlier, but you are not feeling like your system is super taxed from doing all of this.
No, and again, I am running the renderer on a separate computer, but
Hmm.
before I got that Mac Mini, I was running the renderer on the same computer and didn't really notice much of a hit. It's not
Hmm.
that CPU intensive. I mean, all it's doing is some panning and a binaural render. Really. That's
Hmm.
it. It's not there's a lot going on, but it's not processor intensive stuff going on,
Right.
really.
Right.
There's a limiter, there's panning, and there's a binaural encoding.
Yeah.
So it's got a pretty small footprint.
Okay, on uh, this line, hello Andrew, when you say you can use the bounce offline option from Pro Tools instead of the renderer, does this hold true for the binaural version? That's from Jan.
Yes, because the binaural is what you end up with when you do that bounce is the ADM. Then what you can do is you can open that ADM in the renderer and just hit play, and your binaural will come back.
Awesome.
The ADM. We froze.
There you
You
are.
can export the ADM as an MP4 as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, the binaural is the Atmos decoding has the binaural encoding in it. So when they update the binaural encoder, every ADM file in the world will have better binaural encoding. It's not baked in. You can print the stereo binaural, then that's baked in. There's
Mhm.
no more metadata, there's no more anything. It is two channels of audio, and all of the phase stuff that the binaural rendering did is baked into that file. That's not something that's actually used very often. The MP4 is what is used to generate the binaural on the fly in most cases. There are places there, depending on the streaming systems are different. They'll have multiple different streams going at the same time, and it's all about payload and blah blah blah. But they will re-render binaurals as that stuff gets updated. So if it ever is rendered, it'll get re-rendered to be updated. But in general, the binaural is a playback time.
I think it was encoder at the end of that. Frozen. Frozen. Oh, he's
There
there.
we
He
are.
is. Yeah. Awesome.
Oh,
Okay, so question about that though. Does that mean that your mix won't sound like your mix in 5 years when all of that's
the
been
binaural, the
changed and
binaural will
upgraded?
sound different. Yes, the
Yeah.
binaural will sound, and I'm all
Yeah.
for it because right now
Yeah.
the binaural is pretty good, but it can be so much better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the binaural is just a representation of the multi-channel object-based Atmos mix.
Right.
It isn't the binaural mix. You're not mixing separately. You might tweak your Atmos mix based on what you hear in the binaural, like dealing with Phantom Center and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and you should
Mm-hmm.
to make it better. But if they find that there's a better way to crash down for different speaker things, they'll change that as well.
Right.
And then that could sound different. So, yes, it is very possible that the binaural version of your ADM will sound different in the future. And I would say that's a really good thing because I think it can definitely be better.
Right. Right.
It's cool now, but it can be better and will be better.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my brain is going to like we're back in you can't perfectly recall something again. But it should
Yeah,
be an
but I
improvement is
mean,
the
you
argument.
can, you can.
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Moving on. All right.
Moving on.
All right. Um, okay. Glenn says, I'd love to hear Andrew talk about why he's going away from parallel compression. So lightly teased at that.
Just we'll make it brief. Just the way it sounds. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the trade-off has always been you can make things louder without losing the uncompressed transients and things like that, but it makes everything really dense
Mm-hmm.
and brings the level of the mix way up. And I'm just starting to get sick of the sound of it. That's all. I mean, there's still, I use plenty still, especially on drums. Like it's how I get the drums to do what I want them to do and whatever. But I'm just using less of it. I've got all the returns of my parallel stuff on a VCA. That VCA used to always be, well, the VCA didn't even used to exist. Then it was always at 0 for a while. And now it'll be at -8, -15. Like there will be almost no parallel stuff because it's just, yeah, it's just changing taste. It's not because there's anything wrong with parallel compression. You hear stuff different and you get sick of stuff. Like my template gets a save as on average at least once a month. I'm on version 58 of my template
Mm-hmm.
since I moved into the box. Um, And with the Atmos stuff, I've been doing a save as, 3 or 4 times a month. But yeah, just stuff changes. That's all.
Hmm.
It's just taste. My taste has changed.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. So, Gav would also like to know, when will we get channels for wind and temperature and smells? And it kind of exists, not in Atmos, but there are. They call them 4D movie theaters.
Look, you want to go in the Wayback Machine, go on Wikipedia and look up smell-o-vision. It's from the 50s, maybe 60s. It's awesome. There were two competing formats for aroma-induced theater experiences.
This is real. I
Yeah.
always thought that was a joke when people would say that.
No. No,
Oh
it's
wow.
real. It's real.
Yeah.
Go down the rabbit hole. That's a little Wikipedia challenge for you guys later on.
Love to watch Jurassic Park and smell-o-vision.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I think that we are mostly through them.
Oh, sorry, you were frozen.
Oh yeah, I think that we're mostly through them.
Okay.
This, I mean, there are more here, but there's a lot of kind of repeat things that we've touched on, like which audio control do you use for your Atmos mixers or your Atmos monitor?
Well, I
Um,
didn't mention that actually. So the monitor switching is happening inside the Matrix, and
mhm,
DAD, who make all the audio stuff for the Matrix, make a thing. So DAD, Dad, is the company, and they make the Mom, which is the monitor operating module. So the Dad Mom is my
Dad mom.
monitor controller, and it is literally just a metal box with buttons and a knob and an Ethernet connection on the back. And it's expensive for something just to turn a knob, but I worked without it for about 2 months, and it
Hmm.
drove me crazy because you had to have the dock on and certain things focused for the dock to control the monitors, and switching between things I'd have to look and see what I was selecting for a source. Whereas with this controller, it's very tactile. It works and it's heavy, and I really like it.
Hmm.
So if you've got the money, it's a fantastic monitor controller, and it's got 4 layers of buttons. So like on my top layer, I've got my 3 main inputs for my headphones and my 3 main inputs for my speakers and the volume knob and dim and cut. But then on layer 2, I've got 6 sources for the speakers. Layer 3 is 6 sources for the headphones. So I can get to everything really, really fast with it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah.
And there
Uh,
are lots and lots of third-party monitor controllers out there as well, if you want to look into those. Because if you're not going
right.
full-blown Matrix, then you're not going to take advantage of any of that stuff. So there are plenty of other monitor controllers.
So, the next question, let's see. Sorry, there are plenty of other Atmos monitor controllers. You're saying,
Well, no, it doesn't have to be Atmos, right? The
mm,
render is what takes care of all the Atmos stuff, so it
right?
just has to be a multi-channel speaker controller. So
Gotcha.
whatever your
Yeah.
setup is, like there are plenty of 7.1 monitor controllers. So if you're only going to have 7.1, then that's all you need.
Right. Right. Okay. Uh,
It's just a volume knob for that many channels of audio going to speakers.
right. Yeah. Gav also asks, Andrew, have you had support from Dolby in getting your system up and running? I'm curious, as it's in the developer section of Dolby, whether support is available for people working only on headphones. I didn't get that much of a reply with any support from Dolby.
Um, yeah, I mean, I got help from Dolby, but look, I do shows like this and I get to talk to lots of people, and I'm really lucky, and I've been in the business for a
Hmm.
long time and I happen to know people. So but they were super helpful, but there's not there really isn't that much to know. And
Hmm.
they've got a lot of really good documents. It's not the best organized thing in the Dolby developer site to find all of the how-tos, but there are a lot of really good documents about it. And if you're just going to work in headphones, there's almost nothing to know. Run the render on the same computer, set Pro Tools playback engine to Dolby Audio Bridge. That gets everything off into the renderer. How you work in Atmos in Pro Tools is all in the Pro Tools manual. You don't need any
Right.
Dolby manuals for that at all.
Right.
The renderer application is actually really, really simple. And you just have to say, well, okay, what playback engine am I using inside of the renderer to get the binaural out to my headphones? And you could
Hmm.
select built in audio. and use the headphone jack on your MacBook Pro, and that would work fine.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot to know. If you're just using headphones, it's actually really, really simple to set up. But Dolby, yeah, I mean, they're obviously going to be as proactive as they can be because they want people to use this. They're not trying to
Yeah.
be opaque and make
Right.
it only for exclusive, upper tier people. Like they want everybody using this stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Let's see. And Anthony would like to buy you a beer. So he's asking if you'll come
I
to
will.
Wales.
Where in Wales?
He didn't say.
Actually, no, I'm not. At the moment, I'm not going anywhere because
Right.
the Delta variant is not a joke. So yeah, unfortunately,
Yep.
we'll take a rain check on that beer, and I'm very much looking forward to doing another We're Thirsty event and going to a pub and having
Yeah.
a beer with a bunch of you folks.
Yeah.
But I don't know when that's going to be.
Awesome. Okay. Steve Genowick asks, is Andrew using any Pro Tools controllers? Dock S1. Dock
I
or
am
S1 question
using.
mark.
I have a dock and two S1s, which I love when I turn them on, and I'd say probably 80% of the time I don't have them on. I turn them on when I'm starting mixes and I just want to grab stuff, and I've got a great workflow with VCAs and
Mhm.
spilling those and all that kind of stuff, and that's really, really cool. But once I've got the mix kind of going, I generally don't. And sometimes I'll just turn the dock on and not even turn on the Pro
Mm.
Tools control software. So I've got one fader, and in whatever track I select, it's on that fader, and I can do rides. But I don't need more than one fader that often, and it's just at the beginning of mixes. And I don't use it for the Atmos A pan stuff. I just haven't gotten used to doing it. I'm really used to doing that sort of stuff on screen. There are also some very, very cool apps. I would like to give a little shout out to Sound Particles, who've got an app now. Hold on, what's it called? I got to find it so I don't mess this up.
Is it
Where
Energy
is it?
Panner?
No, 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 no. It's just come out, and it is a panner that uses your cell phone. You put a plug-in on the Pro Tools track, and you use your iPhone, and it uses all of the gyroscopes and motion sensors in it, and you use it to
No.
pan. And so
No.
if you
Oh, that's
automate
awesome.
enable the pan, it is by far the best way to make stuff fly around the room. It's awesome.
Ah,
Dolby
that's
has
cool.
a plugin called the Dolby Music Panner, which is great. And it's got this crazy step sequencer mode where you can draw shapes and have them go, and those can run the built-in panners as well. But I need to do a caveat that you guys are going to have to get down the rabbit hole and figure out how to do it. All of the plugins that do panning will not create metadata in the renderer. So you have
Mm.
to get that plugin's panning as pan automation in the Pro Tools session, and there are ways to do it. You pop the track into latch mode, you automate enable all of the pan parameters, you run the plugin, and the Dolby Music Panner will actually write pan automation to the track. Then at that point, that automation will get to the renderer. Now, if you are bouncing your ADM inside the renderer, you don't need to do that because the audio is being panned as the session plays back in real time. When
Mm.
you bounce offline inside of Pro Tools, there's no round trip for that metadata to make, and then it doesn't get seen. So it's kind of a Pro Tools bug, but it's an implementation hole that is very difficult to do because a plugin isn't supposed to do panning. The mixer is supposed to do the panning. So there's
Mhm.
some amazing panning plugins, but if you're doing offline bounces inside of Pro Tools, you've got to make sure that that metadata gets respected in that offline bounce. And if it doesn't, you need to bounce it to pan automation. And I'm not going to say any more about it, but that's a big topic that's a little squirrely, but it's easy when you know how. So you can
Right.
go find out how elsewhere.
Right. Okay. There it is.
Yeah, Space Controller. There it is. It's really cool. And it's just for automating stuff. I mean, I don't know how useful it is. Like, oh, I'm going to place that perfectly. Well, if you're going to place something perfectly, you're going to do it with a mouse on screen or a hardware controller. But man, for moving stuff around in a creative way, it is awesome.
I just realized that there's going to be, of course, a whole nother batch of tools for Atmos. Brightness panner here, for example, like these are going to be Atmos specific plugins, and that's going to be a whole thing. So,
Yeah, and there are
uh,
already a ton of people doing reverbs that
hmm
are wider even than 7.1. There's some 916 reverbs now. Inspirata does it. I can't remember the names of a couple others.
hmm
The uh, I don't want to forget their name because the Inspirata one's cool, but then there's also one by the same people who did the Brukasti emulation, and I'm totally
hmm
spacing on their name. But they do a
Oh,
true
Seventh Heaven.
surround. Yeah, Seventh Heaven.
Yeah.
The guys who do Seventh Heaven also do a true surround reverb with height. Um, yeah,
Wow.
but then again, like I said, you can also build some amazing Atmos spaces out of stereo things, multiple ones with slightly different parameters. Longer pre-delay, a little more damping, longer time. That sounds further away. Put it in the back. It's great.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. That's that's super cool. I mean, this now it's starting to turn into a Wii game, which is great.
Yeah.
I'll take
Yeah,
it.
and it's really fun, and then you say, well, but that's not very useful. But it's really useful
No,
when you
that
want to
looks
move something
useful.
around.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually does look very useful. So cool.
It's quite cool.
Um, yeah. Let's see here. I'm just gonna see if anybody else had anything to say over on YouTube. And we're almost getting to the regular cutoff time on the Andrew Talks to Awesome People.
Exactly. Well, and I think that Thinkers is probably going to be posting in the chat real soon
Yeah,
to say,
yeah,
where the fuck is my tuna?
yeah. There's busy, yeah, video evidence of the cat neglect that is going on in my house right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well, all right. Why don't we wrap it up there, and we'll just
yeah,
say real quickly what's coming up. So next week is another episode in Andrew Talks to himself and Mark. But next week is going to be all about sound flow, which
yes,
is something I am super into. And I'll show you how I use it. Some of the really, really simple scripts that I've written that have changed my life, and some of the really, really complicated things I'm working on. I'll show you guys some stuff that I am. It's not even. Well, I guess it's all in beta now, but
mhm,
like I got stuff that does stuff, and SoundFlow is fucking cool. So we're just going to do this again, and
yeah.
then we have 2 weeks of interviews. So 2 weeks from today, a man who was the answer to a question on Mastermind. Frozen. Frozen. Are we unfrozen? I think we're unfrozen. Oh, and there's Mole. There we go. So I got a cat too who does not
I
need
just
tuna at the moment.
I put you full screen for the big announcement, and then we had the
All right.
freeze. It was
And then
perfect.
we had the big freeze. So 2 weeks from tonight, we are interviewing someone who was an answer to a question on Mastermind of all things. So that's how you know you're famous. Bob Rock. Cannot wait for that. That's going to be amazing. And then the following week on the 27th is part 2 with Jakir. And that wraps up September for us. And like I said at the beginning, if you weren't here, you didn't hear this. We're continuing to do things. We will do almost every single Monday, but there will be evenings like this where I blab about things. There will be evenings which are just Q&As, not interviews with people we've already talked to. There will be some panels because I think like the hearing health panel was amazing. But I want to do a panel on Atmos. So I want Steve Jenowick to be on screen because he knows way more about this than me, but I just hogged the whole evening. So hopefully we'll get Steve and Greg Penny and Dave Way and Manny Markin. I think that'd be a pretty fucking good panel. And then there will be 2 interviews a month. That is the plan because I think my brain can keep up with that. So, yeah.
Amazing,
Did I forget
awesome.
anything?
I don't think so. I think
Oh, and the
that's a
mix
lot of
tank
stuff.
takeovers. We're going to do more of
Yeah,
those as well, the mix review stuff. And for people who
yeah.
don't know what mix tank is, it is this awesome platform for pureMix subscribers to submit mixes, and there are peer reviewed. Basically, there are tons of people who just listen to your mix and go, man, I would turn kick drum up, or I don't
hmm
like that harmonica solo, or whatever. But really constructive, great feedback. And then every once in a while they do mix tank takeovers where people come in, like John Paterno did an amazing one, Daryl Thorpe's done one, where just come in and like I did one last week, and for 3 hours I listened to people's mixes and made comments. So we'll be doing that as a semi-regular thing on here.
Yeah, awesome. That was great last week. Everybody had a blast. The chat room was on fire. So very
Good,
cool.
excellent. All
All
right,
right,
well,
guys.
I'm going to go have that beer, but not in Wales. So,
I'm
but
gonna go get
Anthony,
tuna
will
for my
will
cat.
yeah, you better.
Awesome.
All
All
right, so
right.
from Stinkers and Mole, that's all we got.
That's all we got. Frozen!